Hello and welcome once more to F Sobriety. I believe I am Craig Woods, unless I have been recast. And I believe the person with me is James Hamilton, unless someone has hacked him and found his exploit.
Yes, indeed, I am James Hamilton, or perhaps I'm just a re-envisioned, pun intended, version of James Hamilton with no memory of my life before the start of this podcast.
That sounds like an enviable position, to be quite honest. How have you been, James?
Yeah, I've been pretty good. As we alluded to in our intro there, I've been enjoying some of television and pop culture's finest offerings so far this year. Can't believe it's February already.
Yep, here we are, another February. Wow, that last one just pissed by, didn't it?
Yep, the first February just went really quickly.
Yeah, for the benefit of the listeners, just to illustrate our position, we're here still in Lockdown 3, Tokyo Drift in Scotland, and we're also inundated with heavy snow. It's a good time to be alive.
Yep, and indoors.
Always indoors, all the time. So it's a good time to catch up on TV and on popular culture generally, so I guess that's why we're here. I don't mean philosophically why we're all here, although...
Hopefully for the listener it's a good time and a good reason for them to be here as well. Otherwise, they're going to be incredibly disappointed in the next 3 to 4 hours of content.
So, this episode, we are back to continue our Mr. Robot rewatch, and we're also going to have a wee chat about some current things that have been going on, televisual-wise and otherwise. Specifically, we wanted to talk about WandaVision, because it's turning out to be a very enjoyable show, and there's a lot of interesting things going on in there, and yeah, I think we could do a wee chat about that before we get down to the Mr. Robot business.
I think so. Should we mention to the listening audience that we had planned originally for this episode to be another double Mr. Robot episode, but we had so much other stuff come up that we wanted to talk about that we opted for the single episode.
Right, and we wanted to avoid a repeat of a previous episode with the catchy title of We Didn't Start the Fargo, wherein we had so many things to talk about that the episode became, I think, approximately 6 months long, and we talked about far too many things. So we're desperate not to repeat that mistake, so we're going to try and keep it as concise as possible, but we do have a lot to cover.
Apologies to anyone who enjoyed that episode.
It's one of our more popular episodes, so yeah. I figure for the sake of both our sanity and also the fact that I'm working early shifts this week, I don't want to exhaust myself too much. And we also want to... We've been a bit slow since coming back in 2021 getting these episodes out, so... yeah, I think concision is probably key here.
Yep, we're gearing up. I was like, struggling around my birthday. We don't want that same mistake this month with Craig's birthday.
Midlife crisis.
So, yep. Speaking of which, when is your birthday again?
And your other Faith No More faves. Yep. My birthday is on the 26th of February.
Wow, that's going to be easy to remember because that's not only is it going to be the date that our podcast upload
that's
renews,
right, cycle renews,
but it's also going to be when your annual cycle renews.
Right, another lap around the sun, if we ever see the sun again.
I've heard of this sun they have nowadays.
It could be worse. We could be trapped inside a sitcom.
Indeed.
And on that note, shall we talk some WandaVision?
We shall.
Before we do that, though, shall we pass over to the Hamiltron to let her do the business? If, for those of you who are out here just waiting to hear Mr. Robot chat, the Hamiltron can direct you where to go.
Yep, sure thing, Hamiltron. Why don't you go ahead and tell the listeners where to skip to?
Let's be real. You're listening to this podcast because you want to hear about Mr. Robot, aren't you? Not to hear these two goons talk about Chucklevision, or whatever the fuck. That's a classic British children's television reference for you hip kids. Well, either strap in for the long haul, or skip to the 2-hour mark to get to the special juice on Mr. Robot, Season 1, Episode 5, Exploits. Happy now?
It's that pleasant attitude of hers that I always enjoy.
She is the ray of sunshine in the otherwise dark void of my life.
Buzzing.
That was a callback to a Mr. Robot episode and last episode of the podcast for anyone who was paying attention.
Alright, anyway, WandaVision. At this point in time, at the time of recording, we are 5 episodes in. We're just past the equator, as it were.
I don't know what your thoughts on it are so far, Craig, but let's hear them. And then I'll go with mine.
Well, I am all round enjoying it. The first couple of episodes I thoroughly enjoyed. I thought it was a very entertaining spin on. I think you and I are just a bit old enough to have grown up in that latter part of the era where sitcoms are basically still like this. I mean, to be honest, though, one thing I have realised after having subtitled repeats of sitcoms from the 90s and early 2000s, I've realised lately they actually still were like that until fairly recently, at least to some extent. But yeah, no, I was getting a lot of great nostalgic flashbacks to that whole thing, that whole phenomenon, and the fact that we were at the same time getting to spend what seemed quite obviously from the start to me anyway that we were very much in Wanda's headspace. I'm quite enjoying that because I've always enjoyed the Scarlet Witch as a character. She was one of my favourites when I was reading Marvel back in the 80s as a kid. And one thing I will say about the MCU, I do think there are certain characters with great potential that have just been so underdeveloped in the movies, and Wanda is definitely one of them.
Yep.
So it's nice to spend a lot more time with her, and to be like deep in her subconscious is a treat that I didn't know that I wanted it necessarily, but now that it's here, I'm thoroughly enjoying it.
I would do a hard agree. I would go so far as to say that if I was to put it into the sort of terminology that we used when we were wee guys reading comics, Scarlet Witch, Wanda Maximoff, is my favourite Avenger. And I always thought she was like deeply underused since she was introduced, specifically with like how powerful she is as a character, which was mentioned in the most recent episode of WandaVision, where they casually mentioned that, oh yeah, Wanda could probably have like killed Thanos herself if it hadn't been for a certain thing happening.
See, I must admit, my relationship with the character predates some of that development. Like, at the time that I stopped reading Marvel, which was like early 90s, it was only really beginning to be hinted at that point that Wanda had the potential to be an Omega-level, all-powerful super being, which I did find quite thrilling, but like I say, I was losing interest in superhero comics at that time, and to be honest, I've never really gone back, except to the extent that I'd go back and read things from the era I grew up in that I didn't read at the time.
Yep.
But I'm aware, I've been aware because it's been part of the, osmosis through, just being around people who are steeped in that stuff and just getting a sense of it through the culture, that I was aware that the Scarlet Witch had become a much more powerful character, which I always thought kind of interesting, but I've never dipped back. I'm aware of House of M and all that stuff, but
I was going to say the exact thing there, but House of M, I understand that exists, and I've read like synopses of it and reviews, but I was off the comics by that point as well. But in the movies, just to herself, I always thought she was like one of the better characters. Someone who they did seem to ladle a lot of tragedy on, like proportionately far more than really any other character in the MCU. And I guess this is the payoff from that.
Right, I will say that I think that's one of the things I'm enjoying most about the show so far. I am quite big on stories that deal with trauma in this kind of way, not because I'm a ghoul, but just because you get great mileage out of exploring the deepest recesses of a character's consciousness, and I think that's the only truthful way that you can really deal with stories about trauma.
Wait a minute, are you saying that as a podcast that we enjoy television shows and narratives where a character deals with trauma by altering their own reality?
It's not for me to say, James, but regular listeners to the podcast may agree or disagree. But so I do think that in a weird way, like, WandaVision is sort of I don't mean this as a value judgment in any way, but just more in a kind of thematic and stylistic thing. It's sort of a junior partner to the kind of things that we normally talk about, like your Mr. Robots and your Twin Peaksies, which I see is what you're getting at there, in case the listener didn't understand. I mean, WandaVision is taking a much more accessible and much more... It's hard to find words that sound as if I'm insulting the show, because that's not what I'm doing, but it is definitely mining kind of certain tropes very consciously, that I think just about anyone who's familiar with popular culture generally can immediately tune into. To be honest, I will say I did not necessarily expect that the first 3 episodes of this show, count them, 3, would literally just be that sitcom format. And this is going to sound weird, to the listener, but I remember saying to you just a few weeks ago, James, that if I had any disappointment about WandaVision, and I think we'd seen 3 episodes by that point, was that I kind of wanted it a bit more audacious than it was being. I do take that back now, because I think it is revealed itself to be audacious in a really interesting way, just not necessarily in the way that I expected or wanted. But accepting it now on its own terms, I think what it's doing is totally audacious, and we can talk about that ending to episode 5 in a bit. But I think even prior to that, one of my worries was, and this is something we've talked about before in the podcast, I was always worried that this might descend into a storyline where it just becomes about Wanda and perhaps Vision being trapped in some kind of illusion,
right?
And that there being some other mastermind behind it, and that the hat is kind of tipped a bit too early, and it just becomes a waiting game of when are they going to get out of this. I hate that trope. It's one of my least favourite tropes ever. So I was very worried that's what this show might turn out to be. They've actually flipped that entirely. And so I think the way that they're telling this story, where it seems like Wanda is the big bad herself, and she's an understandable, sympathetic villain when you consider all that she's been through. And I think the way in which they've just gradually introduced us to the outside story to do with Monica Rambeau and Darcy and all the other characters out there, the sword agents and whatnot, and good old Jimmy Woo. I think that was a really clever way of telling this story, because we became absolutely invested in Wanda's consciousness at the same time as finding all the tropes really entertaining. And so the heroes of the story now, who are the ones who are trying to stop Wanda, are people who are kind of Johnny-come-latelys to the story, and it really affects where your loyalties lie as a viewer in terms of trying to parse how you're supposed to react to this story. And I think what they've done in terms of the dynamics of how the characters, how we perceive the characters, it's really clever storytelling. It's not at all what I expected from this show. So, and I do think it is doing some pretty daring stuff. The MCU has always gotten good mileage out of taking risks, and it's something that I think the DC universe has yet to learn how to do. Well, certainly the DC universe, what? What's it called?
It's the DCEU?
DCEU, that's what I'm going. Thank you.
The Detective Comics European Union.
That's why we're taking back control in Westview. Yeah, they've yet to learn how to do that, and it's not like they don't take risks if your idea of risk is just putting lots of really unpleasant shit on screen. It's very much a surly schoolboy's view of what constitutes risk, whereas I think the MCU have a way more creative, way more interesting, way more playful, and ultimately way more rewarding sense of what it means to take risks creatively.
I also feel like watching this, for one thing, the fact that it's on Disney Plus, it's reached the point where Marvel/Disney have so much money that they have so much self-confidence that they're like, I guess we'll do this show now, and you'll like it, and also we're going to give you one episode a week, and you'll like it.
Yeah, just like the old days.
Yeah, they're like, we're going to reinvent television.
We're going to bring back the water cooler moment at just the moment where nobody can have a water cooler anymore because nobody's in the office. Yeah,
it's really clever. Like, you know how at the end of, spoilers for the House of M storyline, but the end of House of M in the comics was Wanda saying no more mutants, and it wiped out. Now this is just going to be Wanda saying no more binging. That's it. Never going to be able to binge watch a series all in one ever again. I really like the fact that they've done that, though. It gives you something to look forward to in this time when there's nothing to look forward to ever.
Yeah.
But more than that, it's a really clever marketing way. I hate saying that, but it's true, of keeping it current. You're right, it creates that water cooler thing where there's no water cooler, but it means every week for 3 or 4 days, Twitter and blogs are all about WandaVision, whereas if it had gone up in one, it would have been a week of people losing their shit over WandaVision, and then it was forgotten about.
That's true. Really... Yeah, I will admit I was in two minds myself in the early episodes whether I thought this would be better as a binge show, just purely because I think the way the first 3 episodes were presented in such a way that I was like, well, if this is what this show is, I might as well have it all at once, But now, from episode 4 onwards, it's like, oh, no. I was a fool. There's no better way to receive this show. Weekly is definitely the way to go. It's nice that it's made it a little event.
Yeah, you know what? We had to fucking wait week to week for Twin Peaks: The Return. So these like entry level, slightly strange
if we can endure that, James, we can endure just about anything.
Indeed. I saw some reviewers and I guess YouTube commenters, more on that later, reviewers and YouTube commenters complaining about the structure of WandaVision and it being those first 2 episodes, or like going into the 3rd episode where it was sitcom, with occasional little reveals of there might be something more going on here. And my first thought was, this is what binging has done to people, though. It's like, you've lost the ability to accept a mystery being slowly unfolded before you.
Yeah,
it's just these, like, whatever happened to delayed gratification, there's none of that now. And people were like, oh, well, I wouldn't have watched past the 2nd episode if it wasn't Marvel, and
well.
like, well, now look at the mad shit you're getting here. Like, I assumed going into this show, watching the 1st episode, that one, I would enjoy it because Marvel have got me in the hook, right? I'm one of those guys that I'm going to watch pretty much anything they put out anyway. 2, as we both mentioned, Scarlet Witch in particular, but also I liked Vision, were some of my favourite characters from the movies, who I felt were underserved in some ways. But also 3, if it had been 9 episodes of just them in little sitcom situations with no explanation, I would have watched that.
Yeah, same. I would have been totally down with it. I remember when the trailer first came out, one of the things that most excited me was an episode that we've not seen yet, which is the Halloween setting, where we get to see what seems to be Scarlet Witch and Vision in their Bronze Age costumes.
Yeah.
I am so stoked about that. I cannot wait to see that. But I remember when I watched the first 2 episodes, that was in the back of my mind. I was like, I can't wait for that episode. That's going to be great. I mean, now it's going to have a completely different meaning because there's all this other stuff going on outside in the external world. But it's still going to be great. I'm still going to dig that for all the aesthetics that it's delivering. And I think that's something that this show is doing really cleverly. As it is telling a very clear story, it is a very typical kind of Marvel Comics storyline. I mean, we've seen this sort of archetypal storyline so many times, and you know what you're getting with this sort of thing. Although I'm not going to pretend I know how this show is going to end, because I don't know how it's going to end. But I'll say a wee bit more about that in a second, though, about some possibilities. But yeah, I mean, there's nothing particularly audacious about the story itself. It's more about the way the story is being presented. I will say, actually, one of the things I think is most interesting about this show is the way in which it's engaging several different audiences simultaneously. Because obviously, with all the MCU stuff, they at least want to get the young audience, because that's a big part of where the money comes in for
Absolutely.
all of the MCU. And at the same time, this show is also very deliberately mining nostalgia, as I said earlier. And most young people will just not even be familiar with this format of sitcom. Or if they have seen it, it'll be in the background. They maybe seen it once or twice. It's not something they grew up with. So I do think it's quite clever that I think they're getting the balance amazingly right, and being able to explore all the different tropes of that format that is such a redundant format now, and yet they've taken what was a redundant format and they've made it a storytelling device that's very relevant to this story, that's enriching these characters who were so underserved in this larger opus of, how many movies are we at now?
23, I believe.
It's crazy, man. I mean, I saw somebody, I forget who it was, somebody online was saying that their son or daughter, who I think is like 8-9 years old, was really digging the show, but obviously not understanding the sitcom format because they'd never seen that before. But they just, A, were so invested in the characters because they'd watched the movies, and B, they just found the way in which the sitcom stuff was presented so weird that they were like, what does this mean? This is just so interesting, so mysterious, Because I think for a lot, like for kids watching that stuff now, it must seem like programs from an alien planet. I mean, when you think about it, it's a weird format.
Also, I only found out recently that the first episode of WandaVision, entitled "Filmed in Front of a Live Studio Audience," was filmed in front of a live studio audience. They did the first episode totally live.
That's amazing.
Yeah. I think another thing that I'm really enjoying about this is the performances, because there are certain characters that are in it that we've seen before. There's Darcy from the Thor movies, who ultimately I'm really happy she's in it because I love that character. I love Kat Dennings. I don't mean to sound like I'm shitting on the Thor movies, but the 2 Thor movies that she's in are 2 of my least favourite MCU movies.
Same. And she's like, her moments are like some of the best stuff in those movies. They're great moments, but yeah, those movies are pretty weak, I would say, in the general oeuvre. But yeah, she's great. And I did squee when she appeared. I had no idea she was going to be in this show. So when she appeared, I was like, what? This show just improved in quality by about 200%.
Yeah, I think the only person I knew that was going to be in it was Jimmy Woo.
I did not know he was going to be in it either. So I managed to avoid just about all information about this show because I was worried I would see... Because I had a suspicion that they were probably going to tie it into some kind of House of M type thing. I thought, I'm probably going to see lots of comic book fans and social media comments talking about that, and it's going to spoil the show for me, so I've just avoided it entirely. And so even the cast was a mystery to me.
Tiona Paris is really good. I'm really
She's
enjoying
great.
her performance.
She is really
Monica
good.
Rambeau.
I'd forgotten. I remember it being announced she was going to be Monica Rambeau, and then I completely forgot it. But I knew her from the Dear White People movie.
Oh, right.
In which she's really good. So having her in this role is great. When I was growing up in the 80s, Monica Rambeau was one of my favourite characters. And Monica Rambeau at that time was, of course, Captain Marvel. Look, 80s kid yells at clouds. She will always be Captain Marvel as far as I'm concerned. Carol Danvers is Ms. Marvel, not Captain Marvel. Shut up. Anyway.
Wait, I thought Kamala Khan was Ms. Marvel.
She's a different Ms. Marvel. I'll let that go. I will allow two Ms. Marvels because Kamala Khan is a good character. But I'm nothing against Carol Danvers, but I grew up with her as Ms. Marvel, and I grew up with Monica Rambeau as Captain Marvel. That's how it will always be in my head. And there's people older than me, of course, who are shouting at me saying, "No, Marvel is Captain Marvel."
Yeah, take that, 21st century.
I just want to say a quick note about the cast. Paul Bettany and Elizabeth Olsen's on-screen chemistry is so good. Because this is a side of both these characters we've never seen, and as much as we've seen these two actors share screen time in the MCU, the chemistry has never been anything like this. And so it's just so much fun. Both these actors are great actors, and it's just a joy to see them be able to actually do some acting.
Right.
Because quite often in the MCU, they don't get to do that much. I mean, Vision is cool in the movies, don't get me wrong, but there's something about seeing him be ridiculous and being lampooned and made to look foolish in this show.
Yeah, having the
that is
chewing
so
gum
delightful.
Gumming up his works and stuff.
Right, yeah.
Where it turns him into Rick Mail. So
yeah, that's what I said to you. Yeah, it's like, when did Paul Bettany turn into Rick Mail? His mannerisms in some of these episodes are just Rick Mail-tastic. Elizabeth Olsen's a great actress.
She's amazing.
She's so good, and I'm really enjoying the range that she's been given to explore here. So yeah, that alone has been a massive treat for me.
I am a fan of whenever Elizabeth Olsen goes from being the sort of sitcom all-American housewife character to like turning on a dime to slightly confused or somewhat sinister Scarlet Witch. But more than anything, I'm a fan of that moment where she went full on Magneto and just walked out of the hex pulling the missile behind her.
Right,
I was like,
yeah.
I squeezed so
it's
hard.
It's interesting you mentioned Magneto. I'm going to have something to say about that in a minute. But yeah, the cast all around are amazing. It's a really strong cast. Even the, what's the name of the sword agent who's a douchebag? Hayward? Is he related to Donna Hayward? They're all douchebags in that family. That's a Twin Peaks reference for you hip kids.
Everyone take a drink.
Yeah, even he's well cast. I mean, his character's a total archetype that we've seen a billion times. But I was like, oh yeah, no, he was born to play this kind of douchebag role. No offence to that actor, I mean it in a good way.
I like the moment where his character was really surprised that Wanda Maximoff didn't have a weird nickname.
Yeah. See, it's touches like this. I think the MCU does handle most of the time pretty well. Sometimes it gets a bit overhanded with it, but that one I thought, okay, you've just telegraphed to us the fact she's never had a code name, so we now know she's definitely going to get called the Scarlet Witch at some point in this show. Yeah, and that's fine. You want to talk about the massive rug pulling moment at the end of episode 5 then?
Here's the thing, after I watched it, I sent you a message saying, oh my god, don't go on the internet, have you seen it yet? No spoilers, I'm going to watch it again. I watched it again immediately and then went and looked at a bunch of reviews, and apparently he'd been rumoured to have been in the show, so I'm glad I didn't know that rumour, because it completely caught me by surprise. I've
picked that up in the last week that some people knew about that. I'm so glad that avoided me completely. So when he turned up, I had no idea, and as soon as I saw Evan Peters' face, I was like, "All right, okay."
It's like, I guess we're not in Kansas, or I guess we're not in Westview anymore. Yeah, when the moment that one of the only good things about the X-Men reboots turns up in the MCU, like, I mean, what is going on there? Is this a to the audience?
Yeah, I guess that's the question I want to explore for a second here, because, right, so we know the next Doctor Strange movie is in the Multiverse of Madness.
Yep.
And that Wanda plays a role in that movie, probably as an antagonist.
And we also know
the Spider-Man movie
is a multiverse-based.
Right. And we know that Tobey Maguire is going to turn up, and Andrew Garfield is going to turn up. So I guess the question is, well, it's a twofold question, I suppose. Is this moment in WandaVision, first of all, genuinely suggestive of a multiverse scenario, or is it just a playful trick on the audience and there's going to be some other explanation? The second part of my question is, if it is a multiverse scenario and it does tie into the Doctor Strange and Spider-Man movies forthcoming, then does this signify that the future of the MCU from this point onwards is in some way consolidating all the other previous franchises? Or is this just going to be a temporary thing they're going to play around with for a couple of movies and then that'll be done? Now, obviously, we don't know, right? But what are your theories about it?
My feeling is that it's going to be let's fuck around with the idea of the multiverse for a few movies and then go back to, or then turn our attention on something else. Maybe, well, I say a few movies. Like, for example, the Infinity Saga, you could argue, was from Iron Man up to Infinity War, which is a lot of films.
Yeah, it sure is.
I wonder if they're going to do like some sort of like multiverse crossover event, to use comic terms, for that long, or if it's just going to be a few movies and then they're going to be like, Secret Wars?
Yeah.
Which is, to be honest, as an old Marvel dork, man, Secret Wars is what I want next. I
would dig a Secret Wars. Yeah, Battle World. Get them to Battle World.
But you can't have Secret Wars without the X-Men.
Right, and you've led me to the next thing I've got written here. So with that in mind, we know the X-Men are going to appear at some point in the MCU. That's a given now. So when the X-Men appear, is it going to be the X-Men from the previous franchise? And is that how they're going to be introduced? Or is it going to be, there's some... Hear me out on this one.
Okay.
This might be a far-flung theory, right? Is Wanda going to somehow be responsible for the birth of the X-Men? And by that, I mean... Follow me here. I'm not married to this theory, right? But it's just a theory. We know that Wanda is effectively rewriting people in Westview. So is she making people mutants? And if those people spawn, do they make more mutants?
So is Westview, New Jersey, essentially going to be like ground zero for the creation of mutants?
Yeah, that's where I was going with it. I mean, there would also have to be a timey-wimey element introduced, which is where things get really complicated if you wanted to bring in the X-Men, but I don't know. It was just an idea. One of the things, and this is why when you mentioned Magneto earlier, I'd made a note about this show is making definite nods to X-Men as well. First, not just with the presence of Evan Peters as Quicksilver, but that scene where Wanda comes out in episode 5 and she makes all the guns pointing at Hayward. That is 100% pretty much lifted from the first X-Men movie,
right,
where Magneto says, "You Homo sapiens and your guns." That's totally what it reminded me of, and I was like, whoa, what is going on here? Now, the people who make these things, they know fine well that people like me are reading far too much into this stuff, and I'm possibly doing that right now, but at the same time, I'm like, I feel like this is just one too many nods.
Yeah, I wonder, right, because obviously, for those who don't know, and I don't know why they wouldn't know, but for those who don't know, obviously in the comics, Wanda and Pietro's father is Magneto, right?
Magneto, yeah.
But in the MCU, Wanda and Pietro's parents were killed. So is there going to be a thing where they weren't killed, or is she going to try and bring them back from an alternate universe?
And doing so, make them mutants?
Yeah, and is that going to be... Or is there going to be some sort of like weird universal timeline crunch where suddenly her parents were never dead? And
now, refresh my memory, because I do not remember the X-Men movies that well, because personally I think the majority of those movies are not good.
Yep.
But was it established in those movies that Quicksilver was Magneto's son, or was that not established?
I think it was alluded to.
Right.
But it was never established. But in those movies, there was no Scarlet Witch, there was no Wanda.
You're right, yes.
And I can't remember if it was even mentioned to Faye the sister or not. But you've got a Quicksilver with no Scarlet Witch, and in the MCU you've got a Scarlet Witch with no Quicksilver.
Well, she did have a bit. He didn't see that coming.
Yep. That's all the fault of Joss Whedon, though. More on him later. And
oh yeah, some hot scoops coming up.
Hello again, dear listener. At some point during this episode, Craig and James had intended to talk about the statement by Charisma Carpenter, tweeted literally minutes before we began recording this episode, supporting Ray Fisher's allegations of the abusive on-set behavior by Joss Whedon, and telling her own experiences of his toxic and abusive behavior. Unfortunately, due to time and wine, they forgot, but suffice it to say we support Charisma and Ray, and F Joss Whedon. What a dick.
And so you marry those two, not literally marry them because that would be illegal in most states. You marry those two ideas, you've got a ready-made, really good Maximoff siblings, but bringing the rest of them in, I don't know. I feel like it's going to be something to do with the multiverse.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know whether it's going to be Wanda saying, instead of no more mutants, Wanda just saying, mutants!
Yeah.
And there's mutants.
No, more mutants.
Or, do you know what, I'd really like the idea of Westview, New Jersey being being ground zero for like a mutant explosion, and that's where they build the Xavier School and stuff.
That would be nice. Where is it? It's New Jersey, isn't it? Westview, I suppose it's... Hey, it's close enough, says this ignorant guy.
New York and New Jersey are basically the same.
Same thing.
I mean, how big's New York? It's like, it's like about 20 miles wide or something, and then New Jersey's right next to it, you know.
Is Westview anywhere near the Washington Township nuclear power plant?
I think it's right next to it. Maybe Whiterose's machine will go off,
mm-hmm.
and it'll cause the creation of the mutants.
I think that all tracks. That all seems perfectly cromulent.
As long as everything's getting worked into the MCU, it can only be a matter of time before the Esmail verse is in there.
That's it. We've solved it.
Yeah. We don't need to do any more podcasts now. we've put everything together.
Another thing that occurred to me, I was trying to remember what exactly happened with the Mind Stone at the end of Endgame. Scarlet Witch, Wanda destroyed the Mind Stone. Is that right?
No. Well, yes, Wanda destroyed the Mind Stone at the end of Infinity War, but then...
Infinity War, sorry, yeah.
But then Thanos used the Time Stone to reverse time.
Right, yes, that's right. Okay.
And then was like...
I've only seen those movies once, so my memory is hazy.
And then was just like, good try, but... And then Thor appears, puts the axe into his chest, and then Thanos does the snap.
Right, aye, okay.
But that also breeds the question, where are any other Avengers right now? If Wanda Maximoff is holding an entire town hostage and rewriting all their lives, you'd think maybe they might, rather than just calling in like Darcy, as great as she is, we might go, any superheroes?
I think since Steve Rogers is no longer with them, I think the quality of heroism in the Avengers just gone right down here. That's what I feel about it. The reason I'm pondering the thing about the Mind Stone was I was wondering if maybe there's some way that Wanda has become sort of at one with the Mind Stone or assimilated some power from the Mind Stone.
I mean, was it not the Mind Stone that was used to create Wanda in the first place?
Citation needed, make a note.
Hang on. Hamilton, can you just check that out for us?
It was, in fact, the Mind Stone, housed within the scepter given to Loki by Thanos for the events of the Avengers. After the Avengers, the scepter was taken first by S.H.I.E.L.D., then by Hydra. Baron Strucker then used the scepter to experiment on volunteers, including the Maximoff twins, in order to create new superheroes.
Thanks for that, Hamilton. So yeah, I wonder if that connection of her being created by the Mind Stone and Vision kind of being partially created by the Mind Stone, as well as why they had that close connection in the first place.
Right, I guess that makes sense. Right, so as far as I don't know if you've been, the last week, I will admit, I've started to look some of the theories about that people have, right? And there is one floating about that I did think about while I was watching it. And it's because, the reason I started thinking about this is because, like I say, we've seen this kind of story so many times, right? Mm-hmm. And even though I've never read House of M is basically the Dark Phoenix of the Avengers as far as I'm concerned. I already read this story back in the early 1980s. It was called Dark Phoenix. And admittedly, Phoenix did not exactly rewrite reality, but she was a massive cosmic threat.
Yep. Like, comic book writers are really afraid of powerful women, aren't they?
Right, that's exactly where I was going. There is a problem, I think, in a lot of these superhero stories where it's always a woman who gets a bit too powerful and does not know how to handle it, and so therefore has to be taken down, which is a bit ironic since when you look at all of human history, it's literally always men who are in that position and need to be taken down. But anyway, I do think some of the male comic book writers have some issues that maybe they've not quite addressed. But moving that aside, I did start to think, okay, of all those kind of, all that Dark Phoenix-esque stories that we've seen, how many other times have I seen it play out? How does it play out? One thing that a lot of them have in common is that the heroine in question's power is elevated, or they're able to untap their potential by the interference of someone nefarious. And in Jean Grey's case, it was Jason Wingard from the Hellfire Club, because he was fucking around with her head, and, you know, Mastermind, as he was also known, not to be confused with Elliot Alderson.
More on him later.
And so I've started to think to myself, is that what is happening in WandaVision? And if that's the case, then who could be messing around with Wanda's head to guide her towards really unleashing her power in the most destructive way? And there's a few candidates, I think, and I was trying to think of characters the MCU has not explored, but one of the first ones I pondered about was Mephisto. And I think Mephisto is a good candidate, right?
So Mephisto is a character that I'm not familiar with. Oh, I've heard the name, but I'm not overly familiar with. So.
Mephisto is basically the devil in the Marvel Universe. And I think he's a good candidate because, like the devil, he will just come and, pretend to offer you everything in exchange for your soul, essentially, right? And I think Wanda is such a traumatized character that she's absolutely vulnerable to that kind of temptation. Another reason I think, and I've seen this now corroborated by other people online that have made this same kind of, have theorised this same thing. Mm-hmm. The character of Agnes,
played amazingly by Catherine Hahn.
Catherine Hahn, who is incredible in this show. Now, before I complete this thought, do you think that Agnes is nefarious, or do you think that she's above board?
There's a thing about Agnes and possibly their neighbour as well that is different from other people. There was that scene where at work Vision freed his body from the illusion.
Norm.
Yep, and Norm was suddenly like, my sister's taking care of my dad, I need to get in touch with her, what's happening, and had a big old freak out about how much it hurt. Mm-hmm. Whereas we don't really seem to see Agnes in pain, but she's clearly aware that she is an actor in this whole facade, given the point where she stops mid-sentence and says, should I take that again? Yeah, which I thought was such a good moment in the show, but she's a self-aware participant in Wanda's fantasy, unlike most of the other people apparently in Westview. So I'm not sure.
When I noticed as well now in the previous episode, when it's shown you all the missing persons, all of the townsfolk that they've got up on the wall, she is not included, and we never see anything about her. And it just seems weird to me that if she was a genuine townsperson, her picture would be up there. Like, the show would make a point of showing us that, and they've not done that. And that just makes me think, is she really one of the townspeople?
And she did out Monica, so...
Right. Now, the other thing, her name is Agnes, which makes me think of Agatha Harkness, who... in Marvel in the Bronze Age, early modern age, her background story was she was one of the original Salem witches. Oh, right. And she eventually goes on to train the Scarlet Witch in the art of actual witchcraft. And so that makes me think, is this the start of a storyline where Wanda is going to start dabbling in actual witchcraft on top of her powers? Or is it simply just a nod where they're going to rewrite the character of Agatha Harkness for the MCU as someone who just... plays a similar role but without the witchcraft angle? Don't know, but it's what the name made me think of, and I googled it, and there are Reddit threads that people are already theorising the same thing.
That does sound a little too close to the bone. It's either like a really big red herring, or it definitely does sound like something. I'm not sure if Mephisto would they throw in a deal with the devil, but on the other hand, the MCU
has got a good way of spinning these things, though. I mean, they never do it in a way that you expect or a way that you've really seen before. There's usually always some kind of twist where whenever it comes to these very sort of the more tropey sort of aspects of these characters, they tend to kind of find a new original way of doing it, and I could see them doing something like that with Mephisto. I'm not 100% sold on this, but it's mainly because I just I hate being proven wrong.
For one, I'm like you, I've got no idea how this show is going to end. And it's going to end relatively soon. It's going to end in the next month. So, you know, I'm sure we'll have another episode of our show out to talk a little bit more about it before then. But
to make promises you can't keep, Juice.
I do believe, however, Wanda's involvement in Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness it's got to be an antagonistic one. Mm-hmm. I reckon it's going to be Doctor Strange having to take down the Scarlet Witch. Which, again, that sort of like childhood getting your action figures and smashing them together excitement, and I'm like, yes, I want to see Doctor Strange doing magic and Wanda doing weird hand wavy pseudo magic battling it out across the multiverses. Like,
well, we know how Doctor Strange needs to deal with that. Just break her hands.
Yep.
More on that in a moment.
Did you know that Doctor Strange's spellcasting somatic components, to use a Dungeons and Dragons term, the hand waves that he does?
First of all, gay. Second of all, stupid.
But the actual, like, the somatic hand waves he does is actually like a form of dance, and he had a choreographer for them in all his films.
No.
Yep, there's actual dance routines that were choreographed for just his hands.
Wow,
and if you watch them slowed down, they're like properly like it's like Vegas jazz hands, like showgirls shit. Pretty great.
I have a couple of small notes before we move on.
Mm-hmm.
Did you notice that when Wanda comes out of the hex, note the use of the word hex, by the way. See, this is the kind of thing I'm talking about. Like, you know, we don't want Wanda to talk about actual hexes in the way that Bronze Age Scarlet Witch did, but we want to use the word hex just as a nod, so we'll find a way to include what's like a hex. I don't know, hexagon shapes. Okay, we'll incorporate a hexagon shape and refer to it as the hex. Classic MCU.
Yep.
But anyway, when Wanda comes out to confront the sword goons, she has somehow reclaimed her original Sokovian accent.
Yeah.
First of all, that's an interesting thing to ponder about what the show might be trying to tell us there. But second of all, I've got a bit of a problem with it. Because why is it's only when Wanda is an antagonist that she speaks in a foreign accent?
Well, obviously because get them nasty Russians.
I don't like it. It rubbed me the wrong way, to be honest. And I'd already just about accepted the fact that they had dumped her accent. I was like, fine, whatever, just move on with it. But then they brought it back for the moment where she's being sinister and threatening, and I'm like, I don't feel that was a good move. Personally.
I don't know. I missed her accent, man. I missed that.
I would be fine if she spoke in the accent like that all the time. That'd be fine. But it wouldn't. It wouldn't really work in the sitcom text, though.
Yeah.
They need to have her be as American as apple pie for the purpose of the sitcom. It's the only way that works aesthetically.
See, I wonder if they've just used that as essentially a storytelling tool of this is how you can tell she's not doing the sitcom anymore. She is Sokovian. No.
Right, they may well have done that, but if that's the case, then they should have maintained her Sokovian accent up until this show.
I mean, you would think maybe it is just to make her evil.
Seems a bit irresponsible.
I know,
to me. That's all I'm saying.
There was the moment where she started like singing to the twins when they were babies, and she when she started talking about Pietro, she went Sokovian there, and she wasn't particularly being evil at that point.
You say that, but that's just before she ousted Monica from Westview, so I don't know, man. I feel like there's a definite correlation. Maybe I'm being too sensitive. I'm sure someone on the YouTube comments where we are now, we're now on YouTube, so have fun. Just calling me a snowflake cuck or whatever you idiots say.
You beat a something or other.
The other thing I wanted to take note of, Monica mentions that she has a friend who's an aerospace engineer.
Mm-hmm.
She talking about Reed Richards?
I was wondering about that because just a few nights ago I rewatched the Marvel Phase 4 slate reveal, and I'd kind of just skimmed it before because I was like, oh, it's cool, probably going to be lots of Marvel stuff, whatever, and then did something else. But given how much I'm enjoying WandaVision, it reignited my really excited for MCU stuff, so I watched it, and I didn't realise that right at the end, there, Kevin Feige was like, oh yeah, and by the way, we're making a Fantastic Four movie, so there's that. So yeah.
An official Fantastic Four
We're going
movie
to rescue the Fantastic Four.
Yeah. No more Fantastic Snore, or Fantastic Bore, or Fantastalk 4.
Could it be Reed Richards? I reckon, given the amount of like space-related stuff that Sword is apparently doing, it's got to be, right? Or it might not be Reed, it might be Invisible Girl.
Woman.
Was she always Invisible Woman? Was it ever Invisible Girl?
No, she was originally Invisible Girl.
Right, there you go.
It was the 60s, James. Of course she was an Invisible Girl.
She's not an Invisible Girl, not yet Invisible Woman. To quote Britney Spears, #Justice for Britney.
Yep.
But yeah, it could be... Is it Sue?
Yes, Susan Storm.
Susan Storm.
To give her original name.
See, I was never a huge Fantastic Four reader. I can't think of the Fantastic Four's names without thinking of that scene in Reservoir Dogs.
Flame on this thing. Motherfucker looks just like the Thing.
So yeah. I'll be curious. I'm excited to see Johnny Storm in the MCU.
Will he be played by Chris Evans?
I'm saying that's how they bring Chris Evans back in. He's no longer Captain America, but he is reprising his role as Johnny Storm.
Yeah, that's where we know this multiverse has just gone too far.
One point I meant to make earlier, but I forgot. Talking about the characters that we liked never having been given enough screen time or having been as developed enough. You know, we were talking about Paul Bettany's good as Vision, but he was never really allowed to stretch his muscles. Lest we forget, because I often do, Paul Bettany has been an MCU mainstay since Iron Man. You know, he's been in it from the beginning.
It's true.
So it's nice that he has finally gotten a bit of the spotlight. I think he deserves it.
I think so too, and I think it's funny the way that whole journey has occurred, because he was originally cast just to be the voice of Jarvis. Because I don't think this was planned. I don't think it was ever planned for him to be Vision. I think that was something they came up with as they were going along. Because, in the comics, Jarvis is not Vision. There's no relation between those two. So, yeah, it's an interesting thing that happened there. I'm not sure exactly when. I mean, I guess it must have just been the writing of Age of Ultron. They just came up with it. Because I definitely did not get the feeling they had planned this. Because I remember reading interviews with Paul Bettany saying he had no idea any of this was going to happen. He was literally just a voice in the beginning. So, yeah, it's been a great journey, and that's one of the reasons why it's so rewarding to see him now in all his goofy physical glory in this role. All right, I think that draws a line under WandaVision for now, here at this just past the midway point of the show. We'll reconvene and we'll see how it goes. But as far as theories go, that's about as much as I've got at the moment, and I'm not married to any of them.
Because you don't like being wrong. But, we'll see if Nostra Woodsy is coming back. See if all of your predictions will come true.
We'll start a poll. Listeners, vote now. Do my theories hold any water whatsoever?
You can literally leave comments on our YouTube page now. As abusively as you want.
Oh, don't encourage them, views.
Currently, we have one comment on our YouTube videos, which, to be fair, our YouTube channel, which I'm sure the Hamilton will tell you more about at the end, has been live for about a week. And we've got one comment, and it was a spam one, so,
Excellent, that's how you know you've arrived.
So I'm looking forward to the abuse, frankly. But yeah, speaking of superheroes, anything else superhero-related you've enjoyed lately?
Well, that's a leading question, James, so I'll provide an obvious answer.
It's what we in the industry call a segue.
I did just very recently finish binging The Boys after you and many other people's recommendations, in spite of my absolute loathing of the comic book source material. And I have to say, yous were right. I actually did quite enjoy it. Yeah, points to Hamilton.
For me, watching it, it had a few H.B. Bruh classic Garth Ennis moments. But mostly I think it overrode that and presented itself as a genuinely entertaining show.
I'm not gonna lie, there are moments in that show that are cringe, bro. But there's enough good stuff in it that I came away from it going, yeah, I actually enjoyed that. I will be back for season 3. the world is really well realised in that show, and it's really enjoyable on that level. Like, just within the first couple of episodes, you really get a sense of just how exactly what the world is dealing with, having had real life superheroes in it for the past few decades. And of course, the fact that it is all uber corporate and they are just basically extensions of the military industrial complex. Obviously, this is territory that's already well mined from Watchmen and every other superhero storyline that's been influenced by Watchmen in the last 35 years. And I don't know that The Boys adds anything particularly new to that formula, but it explores it in a really entertaining way. The cast is really good. I found myself really enjoying most of the performances. I always enjoy Carl Urban, and in this show he is leaving absolutely no square centimetre of scenery unchewed.
Oh, I know, the whole place is just is a masticated mess by the time he's finished with it.
It's a thoroughly enjoyable performance, and he's clearly having a great time. Although, I did have a bit of a Lemmy reaction when I heard his accent.
Fucking sound like an idiot with an accent. Fucking voice, man.
I've yet to determine where he's supposed to be from.
Yeah, he's successfully covering about 4 different continents in as many syllables. But no, it was decent.
I think it's very telling about how charismatic Carl Urban is, that you can forgive him that so easily, because like a lot of actors, if their accent was that bad, you would be like, oh, fuck this show, I can't watch it.
It's not the worst I've ever heard. I mean, I've heard way worse. But yeah, I know what you're saying. It did quickly stop being distracting. Like, the first couple of episodes, I was like, I don't know about that accent, man. But I eventually just got over it. I just started dealing with it. It was fine. It didn't detract from my enjoyment after the first episode and a half or so. The cast all have a good chemistry as well, so I was quite digging that. There are elements to the story that the way they're dealt with, I just don't... most of them are Ennisisms. I feel like the show has done a decent job of improving some of Ennis's writing from what I only read maybe... I don't know how many issues of The Boys I read. Not many, I don't think, because I did have an almost immediate aversion to it. So I don't really remember, but I do... The fact, why are they all male anyway? Is there any particular reason for that? Why do all these people, does this gang have to be exclusively male, with the exception of the one character who in the comic book is referred to only as literally the female, which is one of the things that enraged me so much about the comic.
I think that's the sole reason that they're The Boys, was so that Garth Ennis could have the female joke, you know.
It's not so much a joke.
I'm sure it's very deep and edgy, and we're just not getting it.
I mean, this is like it sort of reminds me of when really shite comedians, or even just people on social media claim that they're just being funny when they just repeat reactionary bullshit.
Yep.
And it's like, in what way is that in any way subverting the real life bigotry that you're supposedly lampooning when all you're doing is repeating it? That's just bullshit, man. I mean, and I feel like a lot of Garth Ennis's writing in that series particularly does a lot of that stuff, and I felt like the show corrected some of it, or at least made a better job of sort of finessing it, giving it a bit more dimension. It was definitely a better written show than Garth Ennis managed to do in comic book form. And at least the female is actually referenced by her real name in this, which is nice. I've got to say, though, I hate that trope, unfortunately. Even though I think the actress is good in the role, and I think the character is fine for what she is, but I feel like she should have progressed from what she is in this show by about the 3rd episode she appeared. Because I feel like this is every incel fanboy's ultimate fantasy of what they think the perfect woman is. Oh yeah, she can kick ass, but conveniently she never fucking speaks, so I never get to hear her opinion on anything. It's a terrible trope, and it needs to die forever.
And if I'm nice to her, she'll be submissive towards me.
Yeah, and that I hated Frenchie because of that, and I was quite enjoying his character up to that point, but that bit where she's at her most traumatized and he tries to kiss her, and I don't really like the fact that they're sort of implying that Kimiko sort of wants to pursue this romantic angle. Why is it so impossible to write a male and female character who are literally just pals? Why is that so difficult?
It's not like The Boys is a show that seems like it needs a romantic...
No, right, exactly. And we've already got, what's his name? Quaid Jr. And what's her name? Starlight.
Yeah.
Annie. Their relationship is fine. That's okay. Even though I have quite a lot of misgivings about this whole thing where a lead character's significant female other dies at the start of the story, and within the next few episodes he's already found a new love interest. I hate that. I'm not saying he needs to live in a fucking chastity belt and a hair shirt forever. I'm just saying that the turnaround is a bit inappropriate for me. It just makes me feel really uneasy. So, yeah, I do still have problems with this, and most of the problems I have with it are things I have problems with Garth Ennis's writing, that I think the way he approaches sexual politics is pish. And the reason I think it's pish is because I can see him doing it consciously. Like, it's not like he's doing it unconsciously where he's just inserting deeply ingrained biases without thinking about it. He's clearly thought about including these consciously, and that's what bothers me about it.
So much of that stuff that he puts in is, no pun intended, lampshaded. A lot of Garth Ennis' writing seems like what he puts in the pages. Like, do you remember when Chris Morris interviewed Jerry Springer? And he was speaking completely normally to him, apart from when he said the word controversial. That's just, that word and that voice is constantly running through Garth Ennis' head when he's writing. He's like, oh, I'm so controversial.
Yeah, no, I definitely get that feeling as well. And I think, being a 2000 AD reader all my life, I remember in the early 90s exactly the point where Garth Ennis really started to do that more and more. Like, you could really see it coming through. Mm-hmm. And at that time I was like 14 years old, and I think some of the stuff I thought was quite cool. When I look back on that stuff now and I'm like, cringe, bro.
He posted cringe in 2000 AD.
And even some of his work that I thought for ages was really quite worthy. Like, I remember back, you probably were as well, I was really into Preacher back in the day. When did that start? Like 95?
Was it that early?
I think it was, yeah. I think it was mid-90s, 95 or 96. So I'd been like 18, 19 at the time, and I really thought that series was the absolute shit. And I tried rereading that series like 5 years ago. I could not get any further than 2 issues. I was like, no, I can't do this. This has not aged well.
There was stuff in 2000 AD that Garth Ennis wrote that I thought was really cool back then, that, even not having to reread it, but in hindsight, I'm like, like when he wrote Time Flies. I loved Time Flies when it was first in 2000 AD, but even thinking back on it, it's just like, they had like the Bros characters whose names were Pratt and Puke Gloss, and I'm like, right, that's actually just shite. It's not even remotely clever.
Even the editors of Oink would have turned their noses up at it. Nah, you need to try harder than that. For those who don't get that reference, Oink was a British children's comic in the late 80s that was like the junior version of Viz, and Viz is a famous British adults comic that's been long running now. But it was Oink played as close to the bone as you could possibly get without being out and out, coarse and pornographic or whatever. Yep. And it was really cleverly written satire. Interestingly enough, Charlie Brooker got his first writing stints in the pages of Oink.
Yep.
Now the millionaire writer and producer of Black Mirror. But anyway, yeah, we segued off The Boys. But The Boys is a decent show. I will definitely back for season 3. There's more than enough genuinely witty stuff in it, like the Deep, for example. That whole thing with the Deep that's just bubbling away through both seasons. Yeah, I keep waiting for him to come back into the main storyline, and he did briefly in season 2, only for Carl Urban to drive a speedboat right through his whale. And I'm like, that is perfect.
Yep. The Deep is getting like no redemption. Any other show would take that like total scumbag character and be like, turn him back into a good guy, but The Boys delights in just punishing him for it.
How much more can we punish this guy? Yeah, totally. I think I also said to you, I have to work through my trauma watching The Boys, because the character of Homelander and the way that actor plays it, who's doing a great job by the way, 100% reminds me of my dad. And that's all I'm saying about the house I grew up in. But yeah, that level of just narcissism and, constant deceit disguised as, and all the gaslighting, and pretending he's doing it for your good. And like, my dad would make a great dictator, actually. And I feel like if there was going to be a superhero dictator, Homelander's the guy. He terrifies me. I do find him genuinely chilling. I will say, I think there's moments in the show where he's meant to be funny sometimes. I never find him funny, because I find him appalling. Because I just say, that's just my dad in a fucking cape. So I don't need this shit.
The actor who plays him is so good at being that, so charming and beloved towards everyone, and you know that there's that psychopath bubbling
Yeah,
underneath. It's never
He's-
more apparent than that. The plane scene in season 1 with Homelander and Queen Maeve is like,
Yeah, it's horrendous. Ah,
I really love the character of Queen Maeve as well because she's also abhorrent. But
yeah. It's a hard thing to turn around from.
yeah, when you start to get
but
more
yeah.
into her life though, and you see how much she's been like
Right,
gaslit and
exactly.
abused,
Yeah.
and
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't absolve her of the responsibility, but you start to understand how she got herself in this situation. I mean, people like Homelander, they exist in real life just without the superpowers, and people like that, they have a way of getting into your head and getting you to believe certain things that really only suit them, but convince you into thinking it's what suits you. Yeah, dangerous people. Homelander terrifies me, man.
yep. Equally so,
Stormfront.
Stormfront. Yeah, the thing about Stormfront is hilarious
Yeah, exactly.
and so likable, and
Right, they did a good job of disarming the audience with that because she's really funny when she first appears.
Yeah.
But then when you realise, oh no, she's actually a mad fascist, it's like, okay.
it's like, oh no, she's a literal Nazi.
Yeah, that was some pretty well written stuff. That's the reference, by the way, I was making earlier when I was saying that Doctor Strange just needs to break Wanda's hands.
Yep.
Problem solved.
Yeah.
I think my biggest problem with The Boys, though, as much as I enjoyed it, is that I cannot quite believe that in a world where real-life superheroes have existed for many decades, for some reason Billy Joel did not consider them remarkable enough to include a mention in the lyrics of We Didn't Start the Fire.
Well, maybe the writers of The Boys should have got in touch with you.
I could have served them up
Throw
an
a couple of
alternate
lines
version
in
no
there.
time at all. Is there anything else on the telly front we want to talk about before we move on?
Did I briefly mention 30 coins? Did I mention that last episode?
I
know
don't
if
think
did.
you mentioned it on here. You may have mentioned it to me.
I'm not going to spend I'll spend 30 seconds for 30 coins. If you haven't checked it out, it's a Spanish produced HBO Europe show, and I don't want to tell you anything else about it
All right, okay.
because I feel like you should go into it not really knowing what it's about like I did, and just marvel at the absolute unfettered insanity that will unfold over the course of the pilot episode, where I haven't constantly laughed out loud in sheer what the fuckery at an episode of television since Twin Peaks: The Return.
Wow, okay, well that is considerable praise and recommendation. I will take that on board.
It's like, spoiler alert, if you're listening to this and you're considering watching
And
it
it's
and
in
you're
Spanish, why have I not watched it already?
and you're not a fan of horror or gore, don't watch it, because it is pretty horrific in the traditional it's a horror series sense, but it's pretty horrific, pretty gory, and is Craig, I think you will dig it, particularly because it's well Spanish in it.
Totes Spanish. I've moved it up to the top of the list of things I need to get around to.
Yeah, if you have a HBO Europe subscription, wink wink, then you can definitely find it.
Yeah, well, how else would I have seen these other shows that I was talking about?
Yep.
How else would I have watched Patria, for example?
Yep. You can easily torrent.
So, have you gotten around yet to watching I May Destroy You?
Do you know, I have not, but recently, and some things I saw in the news have shoved it right up to the top of my to-watch list.
Okay.
I think we can discuss what
I think
that
I have a
is.
feeling I know what you're talking about, yeah. So for those of you who didn't notice, the Golden Globe nominations were announced recently, and for some wild, unfathomable reason, and I say unfathomable, I'm saying, I know what the reason is, I May Destroy You received no nominations. And if you've listened to our end of year podcast from Christmas there, you'll know that was my number one show of 2020.
High praise indeed.
Yeah, it was easily the best thing on television by a long margin, and I think there were plenty of other great things on television last year.
But also, it's worth mentioning, I've not watched it, but Craig is not like an anomaly in his love of this show, because
No, right, exactly. Quite often I am in my love of certain shows. This is not one of them. I mean, the critical consensus on this show across the board is extremely positive.
I've literally heard nothing but amazing reviews of this show. People saying that it is the best thing on TV all year.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a well-made, such well-conceived show that's doing something that no other show was doing, and presenting perspectives that I've never seen portrayed in the way that it does. And there's so many great things about this show. It's absurd to me that the Golden Globes did not nominate anything in it. I do feel like that amounts to erasure at this point, purely based on, I'm just going to go ahead and say, pure racism, because this is a black-led show with a black creator and a majority black cast, and it's doing things that are so audacious that, you know what, actually, Marlon James, the novelist, whose book I believe you're reading
Black Leopard, Red Wolf, which I'm reading right now, and I'm behind on my read a book a month, but we'll not talk about that. I'm still reading Black Leopard, Red Wolf.
He posted a big rant about this earlier this week, and I agreed with every word. But he said, you know, if this was a Phoebe Waller-Bridge show, then the Oscars would right now be inventing its first television category just to give it awards. And I think he's absolutely right, because I May Destroy You and Fleabag are in a way comparable, not because they're similar stylistically or even aesthetically, but they are doing similar things in terms of exploring a female protagonist in her life in a way that really is groundbreaking and has not really been done often enough, if at all. What Michaela Cole is doing in I May Destroy You, for my money, is way more... It's certainly braver, it's certainly more relevant to the times that we're living in presently, not just because of the themes that tie in with, you know, the Me Too zeitgeist, if you want to look at it that way, although I think we have to remind ourselves that Me Too is not a zeitgeist, because the whole point of Me Too is that these things have been going on since the dawn of recorded time.
Yep. Even at the hands of supposedly woke feminist creators, Joss Whedon. We'll come to that later.
Again, they won't, but eat a dick, Joss Whedon.
Here's the facts of the matter. Women of colour are far more likely to be assaulted than white women. And that's not to belittle any white woman who's ever been sexually assaulted. We're just talking statistics. But we know the reasons why specifically black women and women of colour do not come forward. And it's because of institutionalised racism. They know that the system will fail them, because statistics show that the system does fail them again and again and again. Mm-hmm. And I May Destroy You pinpoints this very precisely, very starkly, and what makes it so powerful is that also simultaneously does it with massive amounts of humour. It takes the darkest, most disturbing, most horrifying experience of one character's life and explores it in a humorous fashion. There are moments, and you'll see this when you watch it, there are moments in that show where it starts to feel like it could just be a week-to-week sitcom that could run for several seasons. But then suddenly, towards the end of an episode, you're like, oh no, that's right, this is a story about a woman who has suffered a sexual assault and has not dealt with it. And, you know, when you get to the end of the show, you'll see why it couldn't possibly continue in that vein. It's a very complete story. To go back to the Phoebe Waller-Bridge thing, I'm not picking on Phoebe Waller-Bridge, and I don't think Marlon James was. I think the point of the matter is Phoebe Waller-Bridge gets showered with awards and accolades constantly for what she's doing for the female perspective. And I think Phoebe Waller-Bridge is a really talented writer. I'm not particularly a fan of Fleabag because I just don't like posh people. But I think she's a really talented writer. And I have to say, I think the reason she gets a lot of accolades is not just because she's a talented writer, but because she happens to be, first of all, white, and second of all, of a very specific social class. Whereas Michaela Cole, from a working class background, a black woman from a very specific part of London, you know, the story she's presenting is not one that's appreciated in the same way. Mm-hmm. And I think we know why. I mean, I don't think I need to dissect it. If you're one of those people who's in denial about this, I don't think I can help you. I mean, the evidence is out there, so I'm not going to waste my time explaining that. The fact of the matter is, the narratives that we see play out around sexual assault in all of our entertainment and art, they are so weighted heavily towards white protagonists most of the time. And so any show that I think really challenges that, particularly when it does so in such a stylistically audacious manner as I May Destroy You does, it's never going to be commended in the same way by the industry. You know, I mean, I do feel like sometimes the media generally is just that bit more comfortable seeing someone who happens to look and speak like Phoebe Waller-Bridge in this situation. Well, we know why. I'm not going to go into all that great detail. I'm going to keep this concise. I mean, you understand what I'm saying. If Michaela Cole's story took place in a higher income part of London, a whiter part of, or even in the home counties, but otherwise was telling the same story, there's no doubt in my mind you would see that show being absolutely showered in accolades, absolutely showered in awards. And it has been extraordinarily well reviewed, as we said. But, for it to be overlooked in this way is crazy. I will say, I don't particularly place any merit on the Golden Globes or indeed any of these awards organisations. I think all of them are kind of bullshit. But I think me saying that means nothing, because I'm a white male who's never had to deal with this level of discrimination, and I do think there's a point where when creatives of colour are complaining about racism in awards, hearing someone like me say, well, all awards are bullshit, I just must sound like the most spoiled, out of touch person on earth. So I sort of feel like I do feel that way, but it's also a fucking meaningless position to take.
Like I said, I've not watched it yet, but I've heard nothing but praise for it. The likes of which I've not heard about a TV show since something, for example, like Fleabag. And I'm a huge fan of Fleabag. I thought it was great, particularly season 1 of Fleabag. I totally loved. But given the heaps of praise and accolades and awards that were put on Phoebe Waller-Bridge for that, I would have at least expected a similar amount to be given to Michaela Cole. The Golden Globes are meaningless to us because, neither of us are television creators or film creators, but I'm pretty sure that as a creator it is meaningful, and I'm sure as a creator of colour it's even more meaningful. It's the sort of thing that should be spotlit and should be lauded and should be lifted up more than... Not to pick on another TV show, but more than Lovecraft Country, which was nominated for Golden Globes.
Right, yeah. And not even the ones that it deserved to be nominated for, because I would... if you're going to nominate Lovecraft Country for anything, nominate that cast, because they were all great. It's bizarre the way this shit works.
I do understand your point that people will more comfortably praise someone like... Again, not to pick on her, but specifically like Phoebe Waller-Bridge for her work, unless she's smashing a guitar on Saturday Night Live, and then suddenly it's a problem. That's a Phoebe Bridger joke for anyone that didn't get that out there.
Yeah, I mean, what makes it so utterly, maddeningly frustrating is that Michaela Cole is such an extraordinarily talented human being. I mean, that show is so great, and she is all over it. Like, she wrote it, she co-directed it, she stars in the lead role. Anyone who's familiar with her previous work, if you've ever seen Chewing Gum, you already know that she is crazy talented, and she has such a clear vision of what she's doing. And the other thing about I May Destroy You is it's one of those shows that you can really feel the amount of work that's gone into it in every single shot, but not in a way that ever takes you out the story. It's just you're simultaneously really immersed in the story, but also very aware that holy shit, this is something else. This is a real labour of love, And every member of that cast is so great. The production design is so great. There's nothing about that show. It does not get set a single foot wrong anywhere.
Do you think it's going to get much more nominations and much better received at, like, for example, the BAFTAs?
Probably, it might do. I think because the reaction to the Golden Globes snub has been so vocal, I think that might encourage the other awards to go, maybe we should, Which, the thing is, I mean, that's very cynical. It's going to be a very cynical reaction, and I guess the problem is, how do we know whether they would have nominated it if that hadn't happened?
I wonder if there's an element of the Golden Globes snub if there's an element of it being British as well. If it had been an American show, would it have got more?
I don't think the
accolades?
problem is it's British. I mean, the Americans love British shows.
But they love Downton Abbey and they love posh
But that's
shit,
exactly my point. That brings back my point about the social class element. So even if you were to ignore the fact, do the impossible and ignore the racism, then yeah, the social class element is still absolutely 100% a part of this.
I'm pretty sure that in the US, the British version of Shameless didn't win any awards or didn't do particularly well because it's that really grimy working class British.
Right.
Whereas you take that and you sort of transpose it to like a sort of working class American family, and suddenly an American audience will...
It becomes distinctly more middle class as well when you put it in America. I mean, I think that's the other thing. Like the whole concept of class, there being a working class, is something that's disturbing in American culture. So they're never particularly keen to explore that too much. or to even look at it. And American listeners, I got to tell you, if you genuinely believe that the class system is something that only exists over here and that we are unduly obsessed with it and that it's somehow holding us back, which I know that a lot of Americans feel that way, I'm sorry to tell you, you have a class system as well, and the fact you think you don't, you've just been duped. Actually, one final note on this. Have you heard about the film Promising Young Woman with Katie Mulligan?
Yes.
It's swept awards. It received Golden Globe nominations. I watched it. It's not bad. It's decent. It's kind of a rape revenge thriller with a twist. It's decent. Katie Mulligan is really good in it. It's by Emerald Fennell, who is one of, funnily enough, Phoebe Waller-Bridges' writers originally on the first season of Killing Eve. She's now the head writer on Killing Eve. And I will say this, as much as Promising Young Woman is a decent enough movie, do you know what it doesn't do that I May Destroy You does? First of all, it's about a white woman, and it's a very white movie, to be honest. The other thing is that it does show you things you've not seen before, in the sense that outside of that terrible Michael Winner film from about 30 years ago called Dirty Weekend, I don't think we've seen that many rape revenge thrillers where women actually get to go the full Charles Bronson, as it were.
I'm Michael Winner.
This movie doesn't exactly do that, but it does something similar. I'm not going to say because I don't want to spoil anything. It's worth watching. What I May Destroy You does is way more advanced and way more meaningful, way more profound. It considers all the possible reactions that someone in that position might consider, and it explores every single one of them in depth, and in the end does not decide on any of the ones that you've seen portrayed before. It instead goes, in its final moments, an entirely different way that feels way more truthful, simultaneously hopeful and hopeless. And for that reason alone, it's way more meaningful, way more rewarding than anything Promising Young Woman is doing, even though Promising Young Woman, as I say, is a decent movie. I May Destroy You is doing things that I've never seen anywhere else. And I don't think anybody has ever seen anywhere else. And it's exploring these issues in a way that's not just doing it differently for the sake of it, but doing it differently because this is the way that, you know, through research and through reading about experience and through talking to people who've been through experiences and through Michaela Cole's own experience with sexual assault, these are the conclusions she came to. The last couple of episodes, man, honestly, those 2 episodes deserve all the awards on their own. And the punch to the gut that you get in the final scene of the final episode, considering everything else that happens in that episode, oh my god. There's just not another, there's been nothing else that's happened in television, certainly in the last year, that's done anything remotely comparable in terms of being not just audacious but truthful, you know, and that's what made it audacious. It's not just that it was stylistically and aesthetically audacious, it was doing something that was truthful. So anyway, I've ranted about this enough. But I May Destroy You is an amazing show. It deserves all the awards, and fuck the Golden Globes and fuck racism.
Yep. If you don't believe Craig, believe Mark Bernardin, believe Sam Esmail, believe Emmy Rossum, believe every other.
Yes, Mrs. Sam Esmail said this week as well, it was the best show of the year. It's not even debatable. And Sam Esmail retweeted it and said, "I love my wife."
So yeah.
Oh, final note actually on this. I did notice somebody else. When Captain Sir Tom Moore died last week, if you don't know who that is, just Google it, people. That's what it's for. The Prime Minister announced that we were going to have a national clap at 6 p.m. for Captain Sir Tom Moore. And the following day, after the Golden Globe snubs, I saw somebody tweeted, "Let's have a national clap for Michaela Cole."
Amazing. I can't believe that national clapping has become a thing.
Yeah, well, who needs to actually address any of the institutional problems we have as a society when we could all just go outside, freeze our nuts off in the snow and applaud like seals?
Stand in your doorstep and be like, "Arr, arr, arr, arr. What's the cause this week? Is it the NHS again because the government aren't doing anything?" Arr, arr, arr.
Yeah, what a time to be alive.
It's the most British thing that I can think of, is that, you know, when you hear stories about, and for us they are stories because they're way before our time, but here, like when there was a royal wedding, people would have fucking street parties and there'd be tables out in the street with fucking bunting up kind of stuff. It's that kind of thing. It's that weird callback that I don't understand it, and I don't have a mind that can that can feasibly understand why anyone
the
would
thing is,
think.
nobody understands it. Like, even people who they are seduced by that kind of rhetoric and that kind of bread and circuses, they don't understand it either. And that's how this stuff works. Like, it's built upon a whole bunch of indoctrination that we all receive at a really young age.
Yeah, it's like psyops for gammons.
Yeah, that's basically it. Psyops for gammons, and there is our episode title. Yeah, I mean, it's not the kind. This is one of the things that sometimes frustrates me when we talk about. I do feel like I give Americans a hard time in our podcast sometimes. I want to make it clear, I don't think Britain is that much better.
Given our listening figures, obviously not that much of a hard time, because I think we have about as many American listeners as we do British listeners.
I think we actually have more American listeners than British listeners.
Right, shout out to our American listeners and our Argentinian listener. We've not done that yet.
Yeah, we have our own issues in this country. Like, we have our own levels of indoctrination. I mean, to this day, I remember even when growing up in the 80s and 90s, we still thought the British Empire was something to look back on fondly. And I say we think, I mean the royal we. I didn't think that. But very much the education system I went through, I look back on it now and I'm like, that is fucking bizarre that we were still being taught that. I mean, that was the 80s, when the British Empire was already no longer a thing. When there are levels of indoctrination, and it's really, really hard for some people to get themselves out of that, because the problem with all of these things, patriotism, nationalism, all the jingoism that you're indoctrinated with, it becomes very, very comforting for a lot of people, and so they just don't want to challenge it. British taxpayers, up until very recently, I think it was 2015, were still paying for the compensation towards slave owners for them no longer having slaves in the British colonies. And so many people are unaware of that.
Yep.
It's crazy.
It's wild.
And that's why it drives me fucking nuts when, in the day and age we live in now, with Black Lives Matter and statues of slave owners being torn down, people act like it's un-British and it's the most disgusting thing they've ever heard, and we should be proud to be British. It's like, mate, there's nothing to be proud of. This country was an absolute pestilence on most of the globe. That is our history. You have to deal with it. And the idea that the only way you can find pride in where you come from and your sense of identity is so inextricably tied up with some of the most horrendous crimes in world history, that's on you. You need to deal with it.
Honestly, it's like if 7 of 9 was always going, but actually, I'm a Borg at heart, you know? It's a Star Trek Voyager reference for you.
I just about get that reference. Anyway, that's this is not an episode of F Democracy.
No, what is it an episode of, though, Craig?
Well, we're supposed to be talking about Mr. Robot. Is there anything else? We want to clear the decks here of any other stuff we've not gotten around to talking about. What else has been going on, James? What's on your mind?
Well, Craig, if I was to consult the official F Sobriety Twitter feed, at F Sobriety Cast on Twitter, go and give us a follow, lads.
And lassies. And NBs.
What I realised is that I said we would get a new episode recorded soon, just as soon as we finish listening to this new Nervosa album.
Wait, James, is this an episode of Riff Sobriety?
I think it is.
The podcast in which we discuss all things metal.
Cue the music. Hi there, and welcome to another episode of Riff Sobriety, where Craig and myself discuss all things metal. It's more metal than Phoebe Waller-Bridge smashing a guitar on Saturday Night Live. Did you see Phoebe Bridger's tweet that she did about that? Because apparently people were really pissed.
I did.
Apparently if Sonic Youth or And You'll Know Us by the Trail of Dead or Nirvana smash guitars up on television, all of these neckbeards will wank themselves to death, but as soon as a woman does it, it's appalling, you know. But so yeah, so she's been getting a lot of abuse for it, and she simply tweeted, cancelled by incels.
Yeah, I did see that, and funny you mentioned that, because as soon as I read it, I instantly heard that in my head, cancelled by incels, being sung by Diva Satanica to the tune of Nervosa's Guided by Evil. cancelled by incels.
Let's talk about Perpetual Chaos by Nervosa.
Yeah, it just dropped a few weeks ago, whenever it was. It's flown by because I've been spinning it a great deal and I'm super digging it.
It's an incredible album. It is one of the best metal albums I've heard in a long, long time. It's certainly got more play than your average metal album that I tend to listen to these days. And
your average metal bear.
And there are certain tracks on it that are properly face melting in the classic sense. You can't see me right now, but I'm doing the metal salute with both hands.
Yeah, just take it for granted we're both doing that all the way through this entire segment.
The track I'm talking about is People of the Abyss.
I'm doing a Diva Satanica here, saying that's one of my favourite songs. I'll put a link to that video in the show notes, actually. It's like a good track-by-track rundown by the band about the album, and every single track, I think Diva Satanica says, this is one of my favourite songs.
Yeah, so this lineup of Nervosa is a new lineup.
Yeah, so this is your first experience of being a Nervosa fan with at the time of a new album release, and you're essentially experiencing a whole new band, really. Yeah, the sound is quite different, and it's exciting for me because, as I explained on a previous episode of this podcast, I really love the original incarnation of Nervosa, and I love Fernanda Lira, the original vocalist / bassist, and I was really upset that she would be leaving Nervosa. However, I did not predict that a vocalist from one of my other favourite bands, Bloodhunter from Spain, would immediately step into the fold, and when that happened I was like, holy shit. But then I was like, oh, does that mean Bloodhunter are finished? And it turns out, no, Diva Satanica is still doing both bands. And it's like, well, this is the best thing that could have happened. And Fernanda Lira has now formed another band, death metal band called Crypta, who are currently in the process of just finishing recording their first album. So this is an exciting time to be a fan of kick-ass all-female metal bands.
For real. It's, and the Nervosa album is start to finish an absolute blinder. It gives me real feels of like late 80s, early 90s thrash with smatterings of more kind of like contemporary death metal thrown in there.
Yeah, it's definitely moving more towards death. The previous Nervosa album, Downfall of Mankind, was beginning to edge a wee bit in that direction, and I think, ironically, I think that's part of the reason why Fernanda left, because she wanted to go full death metal. Whereas Prika Amaral, the guitarist and founder, she was like, this is my band and I say we stay thrash. So it is interesting, there is that kind of melange going on here, there is still that element of death metal. I think that Mia Wallace, the bass player, has also brought a bit of a black metal influence as well, though. There are little touches of that here and there. There's a bit more dissonance than in the previous records.
Yeah, some of those bass riffs that are in there give it that kind of like almost Nordic black metal feel.
She's a very different bass player to Fernanda as well. Fernanda's a way more technical bassist, and she plays exclusively with her fingers, whereas Mia is 100% a pick basher, and it does provide a totally different sound.
Also, Fernanda plays with her bass about 6 inches from the ground.
Yes, yeah, pretty much.
Also, Lana D'Ameto is no longer behind the kit for Nervosa.
No, she's now with Crypta, with Fernanda, so that's something to be excited about.
That's not to say that Eleni Nota is not bringing the beats. She is an incredible drummer.
She's an absolute beast, yeah.
And again, her style is very different from Lana D'Ameto's style of drumming. And it gives the new tracks a completely different feel. It's not to say it's better or worse, it's just very different.
No,
she doesn't
it is very different.
Blast beat as much as Lana D'Ameto does.
Yeah, it's got more of a groove, I think, her drumming style than Luana's does. Yeah, it feels like a very different band in some ways. Prika's guitar style is so distinctive, though, that's what kind of ties it together. That's what provides the continuity. I've always loved her guitar sound. It's always so chunky. I like a good chunky rhythm guitar in metal.
Does Prika write lyrics as well as she
does,
as a songwriter?
Yeah.
I wondered because like it still has that same sense of kind of like social justice that a lot of Nervosa's lyrics have, which it's always been like my favourite thing about thrash metal of a certain type or a certain genre. It's a really aggressive, it has like a real kind of like political anger behind it and social justice, so it's good that they're still in that vein.
There's a punk edge to like, in the kind of early thrash metal vein. I will say though, that's something that's really common in Latin American metal generally. It does tend to be quite political in a way that a lot of other metal isn't.
I think it's tickling my like Sepultura,
Yes, yeah,
fondness, or at least my Cavalera era Sepultura.
Just hearing Diva Satanica's voice against Freaky's guitar is so exciting. I never thought I'd hear that combination, and it's because they're both just so distinctive, and I've loved both of them for quite a long while, and so hearing them both is just.
Yeah, it's
an exquisite Scooby snack of sound.
Yeah, Nervosa has essentially become a supergroup.
Do you know what's weird though? I did not appreciate until quite recently, after reading some interviews with them, that Bloodhunter have never played outside Spain.
Really?
Yeah. They've never toured, and it's because they all have day jobs, and I guess there just isn't the same sort of infrastructure in their part of Spain where they can really rely on like a big touring circuit or whatever. I said they've never toured outside Spain.
I was not aware of that. Guess they're not going to be touring Britain anytime soon then.
No, I know, which sucks. Although it depends. I mean, who knows? I mean, Nervosa have never, as far as I'm aware, never played in Britain. They've played Europe plenty of times though, so who knows? Maybe one day post-pandemic, if we ever live to see that, then maybe Bloodhunter could turn up as a support slot. You never know. Yeah, I would love to see that.
That could be like they could do like a touring Monsters of Rock style thing, where it's just all the members, different bands.
I would say get Crypta in as well, but I'm actually not sure if Fernanda and Pika even still get along now. They seem to have both danced around this in interviews, so I'm just going to take it for granted that maybe all is not as rosy as it was.
It might not have just been musical differences, or at least musical differences in the classical sense of, it was
quote unquote musical differences. Yeah.
But I'm also really excited for the new Crypta stuff.
The stuff they have put out, just the little snippets, have been so tantalising. Like, oh yes, that's going to be good.
It's a good time to be a metal fan, as one wind turbine said to the other. And I think that just about wraps it up for this episode of Riff Sobriety. If you've not heard Perpetual Chaos by Nervosa, get out there and listen to it now. Toodle pip!
Good ep of Riff Sobriety. Missed those guys.
Another classic episode of Riff Sobriety.
Although it is dawning on me now that maybe Riff Sobriety should just be renamed Nervosa Crypta Bloodhunter Sobriety.
I'm sure there will be other metal that we feel like we have to talk
I'm sure
about.
There are other metal bands.
Other music is available.
Have you been enjoying any other music lately?
Well,
or have you been so stuck in that Nervosa album you can't pull yourself free?
No, I'll tell you what I watched the other night was Jasmine Sullivan. I watched the Tiny Desk concert that she did.
How great is that?
Confession time here. I had never heard of her or heard her before.
Holy shit.
And wow, instant fan.
Well, welcome to the first day of the rest of your R&B life.
Wait.
That was a very delicate turn of phrase. Wait, James, is this an episode of F Sub R&B?
I think it might be.
Roll the music. Hello and welcome to another edition of F Sub R&B, the podcast in which we discuss all things R&B music. So James, you were saying you've discovered the joy of Jasmine Sullivan.
Yes, briefly through like 4 songs performed on NPR's Tiny Desk at Home concert.
It is a pretty impeccable performance all round.
Her voice has a range on it, it's one of those things that's very rare to hear someone just be able to go that low and then and still sound beautiful and tuneful, and then she can just hit those high notes, and just the feel of her voice is just, it was just pure fire. And then her band were absolutely incredible.
Yeah. I've watched that show now like fuck knows how many times. The night it was released, I just could not stop repeat playing it.
Yeah, I watched it twice in a row last night, and it was funny because it was Sarah actually recommended it. Sarah sent me a link saying, "Has Craig made you watch this yet?" And I was like, "No, I've not heard about it." And she's like,
"I did post about it, but we haven't talked about it."
Yeah, and she said, "Well, it's got her in it, so so you might as well get ahead of the game and watch it because it's amazing." And I was like, "All right," and then I watched it, and yeah, what a great performance!
Yeah, her turns up to back her up on the final song. It's so beautiful. Man, it is absolutely sublime. But all those songs she plays are all from her recent, I was going to say album. She insists it's not an album.
It's a project.
Yes.
Yeah. Called Hotel?
Hotels.
Yep.
That's HEAUX space Tales, TALES.
I did not know it was.
To the tune of DuckTales.
Ooh, I did not know that it was spelled like that, actually. So.
Yeah, but it's an incredible record, man. We're early in the year, but it's definitely in contention for top 10, however that goes, or top 9.
Top 9.
What is it we do towards the end of the year? Top 9. We'll see how that pans
yeah,
out.
top 9s.
But yeah, I mean, this is her first project in like 5 years, and
Wow.
it was sort of looking like maybe she just retired because she did not particularly want to, because she had said she didn't particularly want to come back. Like she would still perform now and again, but she didn't want to record again. And then she just released this out of the blue, and it's like, holy shit, she's back. The content on that record is something else, man. And I'm the least qualified person to talk about it, being a white male. But it is 100%, it goes deep into the experiences of different women and different perspectives that women have in relationships. Some of the reactions to it, critical and both critical, and also what I've seen people say on social media, have just been so wide ranging. Like some of the reactions I've seen are things that it's really enriched the experience of listening to the record for me, because I'm like, oh right, okay, I would not have picked up on that. It seems to have, in her female fan base, it's got everyone talking about saying, oh, I relate to this song, I was in that position, I was in that position, I cannot relate to that position, but I get what she's saying. I hate the women in this song, but I love the women in this song. She really goes through all these different personas each song. And
Yeah, I
actually
got that impression just from the Tiny Desk concert.
they're all about very different women and very different relationships or post-relationship states, and how these different women deal with their own insecurities or deal with the aftermath of the relationship, what they decide that relationship meant to them, what any relationship means to them. It's such a rich listen. I tell you, actually, as a male listening to it, right, because I know Jasmine Sullivan is a strong songwriter anyway, and she's always been very vocal about exploring and presenting as much as she can about women's experiences in a way that's truthful, and it's a way you don't hear it talked about that much. One of the things that surprised me about this record was some of the personas on a couple of the songs seem so unlike the persona that she projects as an artist. And what interested me was I saw some reactions on social media reacting quite negatively to a couple of the songs, because they were like, for example, one of the songs does have the line, "That dick spoke life into me, invigoration's blessing soul in turmoil," and kind of makes it seem like this was a relationship in which this woman lived only for a man's dick. And it's like, that's not, to some people that seems not particularly empowering, but then other people were in the third like, no, but it's totally empowering, because the only reason you think it's not empowering is because we've all just been sort of indoctrinated into thinking that women enjoying sex with men is somehow compromising to the women's persona or to her agency or whatever. There's another song which a lot of people are sort of really reacting negatively to. The basic gist of the lyrics are, it's from the point of view of a woman who allows a man to just take care of her, pay all her bills, and it's like, some people say, well, this is the worst possible message, and Jasmine tweeted that if you're judging any of the voices on this album, then you've completely misunderstood the entire album. And it really is just about exploring all the different ways that women navigate these kind of scenarios, navigate their own sexuality and the constant battle that is living in a patriarchal culture, and how they do that in a way that they find satisfies them, at the same time as, having to think about social issues. And it's a really complex listen. The lyrics are something else, and that's before we even get to what she does musically on this record, which I just think is something else. I do think musically it's her strongest work to date. Some of the melodies on this are so good, man. Like the arrangements of the songs themselves, the instrumentation, it's just off the chain. And it's not what I expected her to release. When I heard she was releasing something, I was like, oh, she's probably going to come back and do something that's going to sound very contemporary, maybe have a bit of a trap edge, because it seems like that's what a lot of artists do when they disappear for a wee while. I mean, even Missy Elliott sort of did that to an extent. And so I was kind of expecting Jasmine would do that, but she did not do that. She actually went full neo-soul on this record, but in a way that was totally invigorating.
There's a woman that knows her jazz, right? There is the impression I got from a
yeah,
lot of musicianship that was going on.
She's an incredible presence as a musician. I'm thrilled to bits she's back and active and released this short and sweet, beautiful piece of work. Yeah, I suspect it's going to rank very highly at the end of the year.
Stay tuned to December to hear. Probably.
It depends, although it depends how this year goes.
Put it this way.
Watch this space.
Like, I've not heard the album yet, but I'm judging how it's going to be based on the performance alone that I watched. But if 8 better albums are released this year that knock it out, then it's going to be a real good year for music.
Yeah. Ari Lennox turns up for a couple of guest spots, and she is an amazingly soulful artist. One of my favourite R&B artists of the last few years, and her voice against Jasmine's is such a goddamn treat. And then her appears on it for one song as well, and it's like, this is all my R&B songstress Christmases.
It's custom made for the ears of Craig.
Yeah, it's beautiful stuff. Speaking of her, you caught her American the Beautiful performance.
I did. I think I told you that she performed flawlessly.
Yep, as is expected.
As always, her musicianship is off the scale. Her voice is incredible, but no matter how you contextualise that song where it's performed, it just leaves me cold.
I would be worried if that song did not leave you cold, James.
I understand how someone will recontextualise it as a piece. Like to go way back, like Hendrix doing Star Spangled Banner or something, you know. It's
I will say this: I would not forgive every artist for this, because there's some artists that I like, and I can imagine doing something like this, and I'd be like, okay, no, fuck off. I mean, the whole idea of first of all, performing at the Super Bowl anyway is sort of problematic, even though plenty of my favourite artists have done it and it's not been a big deal. I've not cried about it. So her is up there. That I think her can do whatever she likes, right? She's that talented, and I think she's already proved herself to be very progressive in so many ways, and she's brought a lot of very progressive thought into her music that for a lot of young people who are really digging her music, she's doing certain things that's going to open their minds to certain perspectives that I think, even if she doesn't go as far as maybe I would like, it doesn't really matter, because again, I'm Mr. AN other white guy over here, so who gives a fuck what I think? It doesn't really matter.
Slim Whitman over there.
Actually, she just released a song last week that is on the Judas and the Black Messiah, which is about Fred Hampton, and Fred Hampton is like a secondary character. And so it deals with the Black Panthers, and specifically about COINTELPRO and their efforts to, infiltrate and destabilize the Black Panthers. Now, that movie has come in for a lot of criticism from a lot of black activists I follow, for the usual reasons that movies like this come in under criticism. And having not seen the movie, I already agree with these criticisms because we've seen this so many times. This is how mainstream Hollywood treats black radicalism. It does whatever it can to remove the teeth from it. And this movie, it seems, is doing the same thing. And so some people are like, I don't want anything to do with this movie, and I don't want anything to do with anybody involved in this movie. The fact that her has made this song for this movie, I'm like, I can agree with both things, because I get that attitude towards that movie, and I feel it myself as well. On the other hand, her has written a really amazing song that makes great references to the radicalism, so I'm like, I can kind of take the good with the bad. If people are really tuned into what she's saying in that song, then who knows, it could be a starting block for, the young future radicals of today. I mean, that's often how this stuff happens. Here's what I will say: I wasn't as politically radical when I was a young person as I am now. I've gotten more and more left wing as I've gotten older, and it's like, here's a parallel actually. No Name, who's a great MC. I don't know if you've followed anything about No Name in the last couple of years. A couple of years ago, she posted something on Twitter along the lines of, capitalism isn't bad, It's just a system that can be abused, right? And I read that at the time going, well, I guess that's what I'd expect from a mainstream artist. Her music's cool though. But then it was literally just 2 or 3 people in her Twitter mentions that said, maybe you should read this, maybe you should read this. Literally a couple of weeks later, she came back and said, so I've did lots of reading since I made that comment. I now no longer believe what I wrote, and I want you all to know that I'm now a communist. And since then, she's been 100% true to that. And she has the No Name Book Club, which is all about radical reading. She's reading constantly. She's researching constantly. And her Twitter feed is constantly, I found this out about this thing. Some of you might know about it already. I didn't. But for those of you who are interested, this is a good source. And this is amazing. Because, and the reason I'm bringing this up, she actually refused a spot on the soundtrack for Judas and the Black Messiah on the basis of the criticism I just mentioned. Whereas her, on the other hand, accepted it, but then made this song that does make, albeit masked kind of references to actual black radicalism. But like I say, it could prove to be a gateway drug for some young people. What the point I'm making here is, sorry, I'll wrap up quickly. The point I'm making is that I think both these routes are entirely legitimate, because I don't necessarily think that, first of all, these are both very young women as well. These are both women in their early to mid-20s, and if this is the kind of stage that each of them are at right now, I think that there's every chance. No Name's already gone full communist, so there's nothing to worry about there. I'm not necessarily saying that I think her will follow a similar trajectory. I think, first of all, she's got the potential to be way more mainstream just because her music's a bit more accessible. I don't know. To be honest, I don't think it really matters. Even if she is just a left-leaning liberal, I think that's enough. I think you can still cherish what she does as an artist. She's also a beautiful human being and generally a force for good. She doesn't have to be as radical as No Name. She doesn't have to be as radical as I would like her to be. The point I'm making is there's room for all of these shades, and that ultimately they are working towards a general good. But my final note on this, what I would underline it with is, see, 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, I would never have imagined we would get an artist like No Name, who is part of the mainstream, declaring themselves a communist. That was unthinkable to me 5 years ago. So who knows, is what I'm saying. It makes me feel hopeful, I guess.
I was going to agree with you that both of those approaches, I think, are viable and healthy, because on the one hand, if you have an artist like No Name who is fully read, it's entirely understandable and commendable that they would refuse to be part of a watered down, toothless Hollywood representation of the movement. But on the other hand, if you have someone like her who's, and this is me just guessing, I'm not in her mind, I don't know, but like someone who her might be like, well, I can put this song on here and begin change for people who might hear it. It's, as you could probably slowly get radicalised to anything positive or negative, then it works better that way.
Yeah, a lot of the time I think it does.
Am I like sitting here discussing the benefits of radicalising the youth?
In a podcast called F Sub R&B, we've really gone off track. We've essentially inserted an episode of F Democracy into an episode of F Sub R&B.
Yeah, the TLDR of it all is, her is great, and she can do whatever she wants.
She can do whatever she likes, that's fine. I'm never going to complain about anything she does, because I love her too much.
The only time an artist will ever really turn me off with their political views is if they go like full Q, or if they go like full right wing, and I'm like, oh wait a minute, get to fuck,
My bar is a wee bit higher than that. If they come out fully supporting, being really enthusiastic about supporting Hillary Clinton, for example, that's where I draw the line. I think it's fine to vote for, well, I don't think it's fine to vote for the lesser evil, but I think it's understandable.
Guided by lesser evil.
Guided by lesser evil. But I actually cheerleading people who are literal imperialists and warmongers, that's where I draw the line.
But Craig,
and that's true of both parties, I'm sorry to tell you. But we've been there, we've talked about that.
This isn't an episode of F Democracy.
We have to remind ourselves once again, this is not an episode of F Democracy.
Why don't you tell us about Angel Hayes?
Okay, so let's just shoehorn real quickly. So Angel Hayes is back. This is not R&B, but it's hip-hop, and she does have some R&B tinged stuff, so it sort of counts. You're just going to have to deal with it. Yeah, she's finally released new music after, oh my god, too long a wait. And she is now threatening once again to imminently release a new album. I don't know when that's going to be, because she's still toying with us, as she's prone to do. Incidentally, we are overdue a music-themed episode, and I was going to do it on Angel Haze, but I want to time it with when she drops the album finally, so I think I'm going to do a definite one first, because I do not have faith she will do this in a timely manner. Hazy, I love you, but come on. But yeah, she dropped a new song called Wait, W-E-I-G-H-T. Oh my god, it's an absolute banger. It's Angel Haze doing everything she does best. It's got all the rapid, aggressive rhymes and that razor-edged voice. Did you see the video clip?
I did.
It's incredible. There are real vibes of like real sort of guerrilla terrorist art going on there. And these, like, all these images of her carrying a submachine gun, and then it's mixed in with her natural hair and an afro, and all the kind of really colourful stuff. And oh, man, I'll link the video in the episode description. But Angel Haze for me is the most underrated MC on earth. She is quite possibly my number one favourite, and has been for quite a few years now. And I absolutely love that she just has that kind of dichotomy between her hard, aggressive MC style and that sweet, soulful singing voice that she has. And lyrically, she's an absolute genius. And some of the bars she just spits out are, man, I honestly. See if you were to tell me you cannot listen to another MC ever again, it only has to be Angel Haze all the time, I'd probably be okay with it.
If you saved a puppy's life by only listening to Angel Haze, it would be a sacrifice worth making.
But I think the thing about Angel Haze is she's so unique as an MC, not just in terms of her style, but just from where she comes from aesthetically and her life experience. Like, she was born in a religious cult, and then had this very strange relationship with her mother, and then she went through horrible experiences with sexual abuse, and then has just come out the other side of all of those things as just this dark angel of revenge and beauty simultaneously. And every single thing she does is just filled with that same kind of dichotomy of beauty and ugliness. And she encompasses those things way more powerfully than certainly any other hip-hop artist I can think of.
For our listening audience at home who may or may not be aware of this, if you know Craig, you may be aware of it. If you're listening abroad, you may not. The happiest I have ever seen Craig Woods is in a photograph of Craig and Angel Haze taken when he saw her at the was it the ABC in Glasgow?
It was the ABC. R.I.P. Press F for the ABC. Yeah,
Craig saw Angel Haze live and met her afterwards and got a photo, and it is, you've never seen a happier boy. Just an expression of sheer unfiltered joy.
I never post photos of myself online either. I think that's one of 4 maximum that I've ever posted online. Alright, well, I think that wraps it up for this episode of F Sub R&B / F Democracy
/ F Hip Propriety. What is this? An episode of F Sobriety?
What podcast is this?
Toodle Pip.
Doodle Pip.
Good eps.
Good eps of all 3 podcasts. It reminded me when we were talking about Nervosa earlier, and then you mentioned Phoebe Bridgers talking about social media shenanigans and men being douchebags. Mm-hmm. I did notice that Mia Wallace on her Facebook feed a couple of days ago posted about the Marilyn Manson / Evan Rachel Wood furore, and she posted a really good article. In fact, I might link the article in the episode description, just explaining all the reasons why you should really believe victims. And it's a great article, and it really explains things in a way which I think will communicate with people who are maybe a bit... Because I can understand sometimes why people think that it's perfectly reasonable to just sit back and go, innocent till proven guilty, in upper and lowercase letters, because they just haven't properly thought through the power relations at work. I think that applies to a lot of people, and sometimes it can take an awakening for them to realise, oh yeah, no, actually that is a bullshit position. And this article did a good job of, I think, leading people towards that conclusion. But anyway, Mia Wallace posted that, And I was like, cool, nice article. And then the comment section underneath was an absolute skip fire of just dude bros saying, innocent till proven guilty. Why is everyone out to assassinate Manson? Why are you trying to ruin Marilyn Manson's career? It's like, fucking hell, man. Just make it stop. Hashtag, why are men so terrible?
I'm sure it's nice of these Marilyn Manson fan dude bros to leap to the defence of their idol by saying innocent till proven guilty, etc., etc. But it begs the question, have any of them read his autobiography,
Right,
in
exactly.
which he openly admits being an abuser? And it's not like he goes, oh man, I did, like,
Yeah.
I had this dark period in my life when I'm...
No,
you know,
it's like that goofy meme, I'll fucking do it again.
Yeah. He's super proud, so...
Fuck that guy and fuck anyone who defends him.
Yep.
Marilyn chancing his luck for too long. Okay, before we move on to Mr. Robot, finally, we're going to start on Mr. Robot in just a minute.
Yeah, we'll get there, guys.
I just wanted to mention one last bit of social media chat that did really make me laugh last week. It's from Eleanor Penny, and just talking generally about Keir Starmer, current leader of the Labour Party. Just a wee bit of politics before we move on, guys. She said, Keir Starmer has the demeanour of a man who's been asked if he'd fuck the Queen and is terrified of both answers. And honestly, I've never seen a more accurate description of a politician in all my life.
There, he's certainly leading the party to gaining no new support whatsoever.
Still, thank God we don't have to put up with the horror of broadband communism. And on that note of all things computer related, that was a very delicate segue. Shall we discuss Mr. Robot? That thing we were supposedly came here to do?
Well, yeah, but before we do that, my glass is looking a little bit empty. I might have to head to the bar first, and we'll discuss Mr. Robot when we get back. Am I around?
Think so.
We'll be right back after this short promotional video about the Steel Mountain Data Security Facility. Toodle pip!
Welcome to Steel Mountain's Data Center. Our facility meets Diamond specifications and features a Tier 10 certified build and design, providing you with a safe, rock-solid fortress for your data needs.
James, tonight I am on some Jamaican rum. Even though there's no F sobriety this episode, which now seems like a wasted opportunity. But yeah, when the weather is as cold as this, I like a wee rum, set a wee fire in my gullet.
Warm you up a wee bit.
Does, apart from my heart, which remains frozen.
Fair enough.
You?
I am drinking Casillero del Diablo Cabernet Sauvignon.
Oh, that is one of my favourites.
It was on sale and I was like, oh, I don't get that in office, so I'm using one of my new big wine glasses to drink it, so...
No longer your Tommy Tippy cup.
Not had dinner yet, so yeah, this evening's going swimmingly.
Oh boy. Well, I'm working at 5:45 a.m. tomorrow, so...
So rum's always a good choice.
It is, that'll help me sleep. I've finished eating for the day.
You say that, but give it 2 hours more of the podcast and rum drinking, you'll be snacking like a champ.
We'll see how we go.
So
I'm going to get hungry talking about all this Raspberry Pi.
that's a nice segue there.
Alright, so Mr. Robot, Season 1, Episode 5. What's the title, James?
The title is Exploits.
Of course it is, because as we found going through these one-by-one rewatches, man, you really do get a sense of just how integral the title motifs are to the content of each episode.
Absolutely. This episode's written by David Iserson, who, as well as Mr. Robot, has written episodes of Mad Men, New Girl, and Saturday Night Live. Clearly a bit of a comedy pedigree he has, and I think that shines through in this script, because the dialogue in this episode is hilarious.
It's quite a sardonic episode.
Yeah. Directed once again by TV's Jim Mackay.
I think we officially call him now Mr. Robot Veteran Jim McKay. The only director to direct more than one episode of Mr. Robot other than Sam Esmail.
Yep, the secret weapon behind Mr. Robot's success. The true genius of Mr. Robot, Jim McKay.
So, we are in a prison cell. And we've got Fernando Vera pacing back and forth while we hear a ball bouncing. And we see this guy bouncing the ball on the cot, and he's got some real Jack Nicholson in The Shining energy.
Yep. And the ball bouncing in the prison is a classic trope, classic way to pass time. But this is a particularly small prison cell.
It's practically a matchbox.
Yep.
And we see this footage of Vera in his cell, and it's intercut with footage of him meeting his lawyer. I do enjoy this sardonic lawyer. She has some good lines here.
Yeah.
And also in the room is his brother, Isaac. The lawyer is going through all the various reasons as to why Fernando Vera's operation was a disaster waiting to happen. She asks him whose idea was it to put everything on social media, and I do like Vera's delivery of my aspirational little brother.
Yeah, I like how Isaac's like, no, that was airtight, B.
If we saved money and we were careful, to which the lawyer says, well, this is kind of the opposite of careful.
Like she says, this isn't the imitation game.
So she clarifies that it was an anonymous tip, and Vera tries to question that, and she says, yeah, that's what's meant by anonymous.
It is now spilled milk.
But I do enjoy Vera's line here. It's a classic Vera line where he says, he's not worried about being sentenced. No one can sentence me. That is a cosmic responsibility. We see him grabbing the ball in midair as he makes the realization that it was Elliot is the one who shopped him. And he says, that's who you are. I know you. The fact he's issued the line cosmic responsibility, and it segues straight into this. It's back to that whole idea of there being some kind of relationship between the two. Mm-hmm. It's great stuff. Fernando Vera is such a great character.
It also leans hard into the last time we saw Vera in an episode of Mr. Robot, there were different people talking about Elliot's power, and in this episode Vera's back and different people are just telling Elliot that they know him.
Right, yes. Yeah, that's a good catch. As mise-en-scène goes, I really like the way that Vera immediately gives the ball back as soon as he's made that realization. It's like, okay, I've mastered the universe can continue. And we get the title card over the prison door. Always love these title cards.
The music that builds towards the title card, just that scene of Vera's realization is so tense. It has that sort of feel of like a big, like world-shaking cosmic event.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. This super villain has just realised how he's going to defeat his nemesis type moment. So we segue where the fellas from F Society are in the Steel Mountain diner, and Mr. Robot does what I have to say is the least convincing. This is Ollie level acting of when he goes up to the queue and says, I just want to pay my respects. Oh, sorry, didn't mean to bump into you there. It's like, come on, man.
I've written down Bugs Bunny on pickpocket duty.
Excuse me, sorry, Doc. Yeah, so he's got the pass. That's hacked. They've got that. So they've got the deets they need to get in the building. So Elliot, as they're driving through the gate, is telling us, we are now trying to penetrate a data security site whose tagline literally is, and then we just see the sign that says, impenetrable. But Elliot insists it was people that still built this place. You just have to hack the right person. People make the best exploits. And that right there is going to be 100% the theme of this entire episode. We're going to see that each of these characters has a major vulnerability that in some way gets taken advantage of. Elliot continues to tell us that Mobley, his problem is he's a glutton, Romero is a know-it-all and a hypochondriac. I do love the intercutting here of Romero saying, oh yeah, you're going to get crumbs everywhere. We'll get ants, man. Not Ant-Man. Tells us the target is the very hapless Bill Harper. And we get our first glimpse of Bill, and he does look like the most hapless soul on earth.
Bill Harper, Sales Associate, Level 1. Bill has provided excellent customer service at Steel Mountain's central facility for over 3 years. He conducts ground floor and Level 1 tours, and is ready and willing to answer all questions with regards to logistics and generalised client relations.
Bless him. He's a good soul. And you need to get through him to get to Wendy for Level 2. And Wendy is Bill's supervisor.
Wendy Gallagher, Customer Service Supervisor. Wendy has provided excellent customer service at Steel Mountain's central facility for over 10 years. She conducts VIP tours and is ready and willing to answer all questions with regards to logistics and generalised client relations.
The Hamilton better watch out. I think you're going to steal her job.
I did a lot of pausing during this episode. I actually, before we carry on, I watched this episode twice. I watched it once just taking notes and pausing, and then I watched it again just as the episode, and I'm glad I did, because I missed something that I caught the second I watched it in a row, but we'll come to that. I also noticed that in terms of sheer continuity, during this scene we see Romero still mixing up the special juice and forcing it down Elliot's throat. But
yeah.
we know Elliot's still not 100% at this point.
Yeah, he's still very much in a hell zone. Elliot tells us Mr. Robot's flaw is he is absolutely insane. Which, on the rewatch, Hey guys, I'm crazy.
Yeah, ironically, he's technically the insanity.
So Romero says, okay, James Bond, let's go mess that shit up. So we see Elliot in the waiting room, looking like literally the most awkward guy on the planet.
And he's got the earpiece in.
Yep. He tells us his flaw is he doesn't like being outside and he likes morphine too much. Bill approaches, and Bill, it has to be said, is maybe the type of person, and the very few of them on this earth, who would not think anything of Elliot's appearance at this point. Anyone else would say, yeah, get that guy out of here. He says, Mr. Sepiol, to which Elliot replies, okay. So Elliot's trying to insist that he wants a tour, and Bill tells him he needs to make an appointment. And this is where Elliot says, well, look me up. I really think you should look me up. Bill tells him it doesn't work that way, that he's sorry, and you should try and set something up. Elliot's ready to give up, throws up the hood. He says, I'm coming out, it's not working, I was being too weird. To which Mr. Robot replies, what, like every other tech billionaire? We then get the footage of the Sam Sepiol Wikipedia page that Mobley has invented.
Because Mobley's got over 20,000 Wikipedia updates that he's done.
I have to say, when I think of Wikipedia editors, I 100% visualise Mobley.
Also, the great thing about the earpiece is that this whole time, Elliot's hearing Mr. Robot's voice in his head.
Right, yes.
And we think nothing of it. We're just like, oh, I guess he's talking to him through an earpiece, but he's not.
Yeah, and there are some notes I have here about that, about the the logistics of that I guess I did not think about in the first watch, but now in the rewatches I'm like, oh come on, this was a major tell.
Yep.
But Elliot tells us people still trust Wikipedia when it's all the Mobleys of the world that they're trusting for their information. I love the cynicism in this. So Bill looks up Sam Sepiol, quickly returns and says, oh, Mr. Sepiol, I have some good news. After seeing that Sam Sepiol is indeed some kind of master tech billionaire. So we segue to Angela and Ollie. Oh my god. So Ollie is still in a state of sobbing at his most desperate and pathetic. And Angela tells him, you don't even know why you're crying. To which Ollie replies, let's get married. He tells her, you're ruining your life. And Angela is such a great reply. She says, maybe, but I'm also ruining yours. Lays his past that she stole, along with the infected CD on the bed. I noted in this scene it's 100% natural daylight. And there's something particularly forceful about that, in the way that this is Angela sort of coming out of her shell and emerging from whatever chrysalis she was into, a new version of herself. Everything about this scene looks very verite in terms of the lighting, and there's something very stark and a wee bit unsettling about it, like the way, just how cold Angela is being. I think on first couple of watches I was not particularly picking up on it because I was like, haha, fuck Ollie. But now I'm like, yeah, no, I see now that visually the show was doing what it could to say, no, this is already a different Angela. She's on a different journey. I really love this line at the end of the scene. Ollie asks, did you think about how this would affect me? And she replies, I did.
You're as cold as ice.
Portia Doubleday's delivery of that line is just so cruel. Yeah, it's great. So Bill, meanwhile, is leading Ellie around the outer perimeter of Steel Mountain. He's waxing lyrical about the fire engines and the roads.
I love Bill's tour chat, like, we have all of that inside.
Would you believe it?
So enthusiastic.
They enter level 1. Now, all the interior of Steel Mountain is all lit in that very, very kind of desaturated pale blue, but it's not the same pale blue we see with the Wellicks. It's like the kind of pale blue that if you were an older person who is unfamiliar with the aesthetic language of television drama, you would say, there's something wrong with this telly, sis. I can't get the colour balance right. But it gives it that edge of everything here is that bit sort of remote in the way that Allsafe is, but there's literally no warmth here, and not only no warmth, but no detail. This is a place where no humans exist, you know?
Yeah.
Any trace of humanity is kind of beaten out of this place. Mr. Robot tells Elliot, you have to destroy Bill, tear Bill down. This line here that Mr. Robot has, I really think is a very instructive one, when he says, you of all people can do this because you know how it feels when someone makes you small and exposes what you fear most about yourself. Now, what's interesting about it is it immediately segues a supposed memory he has of Magda.
Magda drop.
Yeah, hitting the Magda klaxon. The Maxon.
Is it a flashback, though, or is this the mother personality assisting Mr. Robot?
We will never know, will we? I mean, it's really, really hard.
That's what she said.
It's really hard to be a 100% certain one way or the other, because we do know that there are two other active personalities that do take the form of Magda and Elliot's younger self. So yes, it's 100% on the table that is what this is, that all the personalities are colluding with Mr. Robot. On the other hand, there's also no particular reason to think this didn't happen. Okay, let's pursue this a wee bit. So we did have this conversation in the previous episode. I was positing the question that, is Magda made into a villain in Elliot's subconscious purely to deflect from the actual villainy his father was guilty of? Or were they both villains in different ways? Now, there's no answer to that question given here, but let's say, I guess it does make sense, right, that this part of Elliot's personality that takes the form of Magda is 100% in cahoots with Mr. Robot, and has agreed that the best way to pursue this, to lead the mastermind towards the eventual conclusion they want him to get towards, is to deflect all negative thoughts of Edward in any way possible, and maybe the best way to do that is to just make the mother the villain instead. Man, it's complicated.
It's complex, but then we also know from Darlene's recollections of their mother that she wasn't exactly Mom of the Year. Yeah,
there is corroboration that Magda definitely at least had issues. So, Esmail shakes fist.
My personal headcanon leans towards that this particular incident might be a flashback, but it's one that's being pushed to the forefront of the mastermind's psyche by Magda, by the mother, being in cahoots with Mr. Robot to push this agenda forward, to make him do what needs to be done.
Yeah, so we're having our cake and eating it and saying they're both true.
Yep.
Okay, I can live with that.
Oh, this cake here is still delicious.
This fence is mighty comfortable. So Elliot, after some deep hesitation, and Bill looking at him like he's a crazy person, eventually starts delivering this, this broadside of just horrendous dialogue. Think about it, Bill. If you died, would anyone care? The few attendees at your funeral would probably be annoyed and leave early. You're nothing to anyone, to everyone, and you know what I'm telling you is the truth. Get me someone who matters, because Bill, you don't.
Poor Bill.
I don't know about you, man, but I hate Elliot.
Press F.
It's so horrible. Yeah, press F for Bill. Bill's will to live has evaporated. And the way that Bill reacts, I've seen this kind of reaction on the face of people who are so browbeaten that it's heartbreaking to look at. And I'll be honest, there's been moments in my life when I've been a bit like that. I've allowed someone to run roughshod over me, perhaps when I was quite a bit younger. Not to get too deep at this, but because of my own fucking upbringing with a mad gaslighter, it does have a long-term effect on you. And so to see that being exploited is really painful to watch. And the fact that it's our protagonist doing it is like, it's not a pleasant scene to have to sit through. But Elliot confirms to us this is the perfect exploit. This is someone who's desperate and lonely enough to break. And that's where we get this great montage of Bill's social media,
Bill's cat
starring
pictures,
Bill and second billing, Bill's cat.
It's a damn cute cat though. So who's the real winner here? I think Bill is the winner.
I'd follow that Insta.
But yeah, I love the moment, like immediately after this, when he calls for a supervisor and you can Elliot's about to apologise, and
right, yes,
Mr. Robot's like, don't apologise,
and this is one of the moments I was like, oh, that is a major tell, because how does Mr. Robot know he's about to apologise? Yeah. It's like, he only knows because he fucking is Mr. Robot. And it's bizarre, like the first time I watched this show, I just did not even think about it. I guess I just sort of took it for granted that the pause was enough, that Mr. Robot was like, just so you know, don't apologise. And it was just a coincidence he happened to say it at exactly the right time. But you look at it now and it's like, man, this should have been obvious. Romero says, we need Wendy, so make sure you get Wendy. And they're going to send Wendy a text telling her that her very pregnant wife is in labour. And that's when Elliot is going to plant the Raspberry Pi in the climate control system. However...
Enter Trudy.
Secret MVP of this episode, I'm calling it.
Yeah, Trudy is amazing.
She is all no nonsense, all business, and she's having no truck with this. She gives it all the, well, I don't know what you've heard, but we don't do that. We don't do tours to level 2, so off you pop. And Elliot is like, hey, I'm Sam Sepiol, all very uncertain, to which she replies, is that a question? Romero confirms that Wendy apparently did not come in today.
Because?
What are the odds? Wendy's wife has given birth. So Trudy dismisses Bill And my heart breaks again at the relieved expression on Bill's face. He's like, oh, a grown-up can deal with this. And he exits frame, and I'm like, someone just drop the Hulk ending theme.
And then she frog marches Elliot to the elevators for my favourite line of the episode.
Yes, this is particularly great. They're waiting on the elevator. And Elliot mutters under his breath, the elevator's almost here. To which she replies, completely deadpan, yes, that's how they work when you press the button. It's like, Trudy is the best.
Oh, man. This episode is full of these little, like, just pure comedy gold moments just slipped into the story that are very telling of what the other stuff that David Iserson has written. You know, this is clearly someone who writes hilarious, snarky stuff on a regular basis.
Yeah, for sure. Trudy is a formidable opponent, it turns out, because she has literally no online presence. And Romero says she's a ghost. So Mobley rationalises that vulnerabilities in people are all the same, it's just the access is different, so he decides they're going to send a text to Trudy's phone, seemingly from her husband, just with the words, it's what we've always feared. I do think this is a particularly neat piece of writing, because most people do have some form of deep-seated fear or paranoia that they've shared with only the person closest to them. So it could be anything. It could be a disease. It could, you know, it could not even be something medical. It could be something entirely different. Whatever Trudy thinks it is, it clearly devastates her. So 100% good job. Well done, Mobley. Albeit you've just traumatized a woman. But it's interesting, this episode, we really get a sense of how far, well, we don't quite yet get a sense of how far F Society are willing to go, but we do get a sense that where there is this moral grey area, the mission comes first, and all other moral considerations are second.
Yep.
You know, it very much goes back to what Mr. Robot said a couple of episodes prior. It says, you know, in war there are casualties, and you have to be fully committed to accepting that, or this just is not going to work. There can be no revolution without casualties, and that's a subject we've come to before on this podcast. But yeah, it's definitely hammering it home here. And I enjoy that aspect of the show. I enjoy that the characters make themselves make these difficult decisions to do pretty harsh things. Elliot, as much as we get to love him, is no saint, any version of him. You know, I pretty much agree with Elliot's mission. Not so much Mr. Robots, because he's a bit crazy, certainly from the perspective of this Elliot, as we see him in Season 1. Just in the headcanon we had when we were first watching this, I mean. But, you know, I sympathise with Elliot because he's trying to find a damage limitation way of going about this mission. And he's come up here, and the reason this scene is so devastating is because he realised he's powerless to do anything about this. He has no choice but to go along with whatever the harshest option is, just to get this woman out of the way. But I still feel more sorry for Bill. So elevator is a pan print access, so he has to go at the other end of the hall to pick a door lock, but unfortunately he's got zero sense of direction, so he ends up going the wrong way and having to double back, and of course he gets back out the door into the corridor and widen to reveal.
By the way, I don't know if you noticed, we see Tyrell earlier in this scene. In the background, you can spot Tyrell coming out of an office and walking up. It's clearly Tyrell.
Oh shit, when? At what point in the episode?
When Elliot's walking towards the door to pick the lock, there's a couple of times where you see people coming out of offices, and there's the first one in the background you see is totally 100% Tyrell coming out of a door.
Oh, okay, I did not notice that.
So when he says, I thought I saw you, it totally makes sense. It's like, you know, like the second or third time you watch Pulp Fiction, you realise you can see John Travolta in the background of the first scene. Mm-hmm. That sort of a vibe I was getting.
Well, there you go.
But yeah, worth watching back. Just play a game of Spot the Wellick.
So we segue away briefly to haughty waitress Shayla. True to her word, that's what she is now.
Indeed.
And apparently she's shadowing Jessie from Toy Story.
There's a chicken wing in my boot.
Jessie from Toy Story asks her what she did before, and she replies, pharmaceutical sales. So that must have been a good gig. What happened? Obamacare.
Also love it. Real important. Wingstravaganza means wings, and extravaganza. Do you know, what extravaganza
means? Yeah, so many zingers. Chicken zingers, if you will. So that was a neat segue. But back at Steel Mountain, we're thrust into an advertisement for the facility itself, presented in the most anodyne way possible.
You guys probably heard it recently.
Oh, yeah. Tyrell's talking to two very shady-looking guys in suits. he tells Elliot that they fund Hezbollah and ISIS.
Oh, his chat with them, though, is amazing because he's coming out with, like, the most typical corporate bullshit chat ever. He's like, they say I'm overdoing it. I say exactly.
Yeah. It's like full-on American Psycho shit.
Yeah.
It's back to that vibe. Once again, though, I love... One of the things I do love about this show is this insistence on portraying all the worst aspects of... corporate malfeasance and the military-industrial complex and the ties between those two things, all the worst aspects of it being conducted in the most anodyne scenario.
Yeah.
Because that is very much the truth of the matter, and this show really is committed to that, and I always really dig that.
And then we get Tyrell saying, I call this fortuitous.
Yes. Yeah.
But it's like, it's got that similar thing to Vera earlier. It's that cosmic thing that they're meeting again.
Elliot just cannot escape these madmen with cosmic ideas. And Elliot trying to fob off this with bullshit excuses about overlapping duties at all safe due to budgetary reasons. I don't know if Tyrell buys this, but he seems to go along with it. But I think for Tyrell, he feels like he's got Elliot in the palm of his hand anyway, or that he can very much lead him into simpatico with his own views. So this invitation to lunch...
An invitation to love.
And Elliot replies, sure, I eat lunch. So you are like the rest of us. Romero is shitting it by that point. He said, okay, we have to go. This guy has made us, kind of thing. But Mr. Robot, who of course they can't hear, says this changes nothing. It's funny how this, looking back at this now, changes the way you look at this. Because certainly the first time I watched this episode, well, this is Mr. Robot in the back of the minivan telling his two troops, this changes nothing. But they don't hear that because he doesn't say it out loud.
Unless you watched the blooper reel from season 1. Have you watched the season 1 bloopers with this scene?
I have seen it, but I don't remember.
Or Kristen Slater says something, and they both look at him, and he's just like, you're not supposed to look at me, I'm not here. And they're like, oh shit, sorry, right, take it again.
You had one job, guys. But Mr. Robot has this spiel about Tyrell's vulnerability, being he's an arrogant prick and proud of it, but he cares what you think about him and probably hates that he does. And it's funny how consistent that remains throughout the entire series.
Yep.
To the point where in season 4, when Tyrell's at his lowest ebb, and he comes out and admits that to Elliot's face, and you see the seed of it was planted right here in plain sight. But as I say, it's his hubris, it's also his flaw, and that's your exploit. So Elliot turns to Tyrell in the cafeteria and just gives it, yeah, this place ain't all that, man. I expected better.
I thought he was just like, you ate here? The quiet seething that comes over Tyrell's face.
Yeah. So they're having lunch by the Obama portrait, which I think is an interesting detail. Bear in mind this is 2015 when Obama was president, but Obama's not who you think of, or not in. I mean, I do. people like me, idiots, mad idiots, leftists like me who think every president is evil. But he's not commonly what you think of in terms of the staging of this scene, and it does give it a peculiar edge because we normally, in popular on-screen fiction, Obama is always associated with a kind of positive message. And that's always been the case. Unless you're watching some real right-wing show. And it's interesting in this scene that it adds a sort of otherworldly dimension to the way this scene plays out. Because the last thing that portrait is comforting in any way whatsoever. Obama looks like he's been slipped in from another dimension. Like he just doesn't belong in this room, just in the context of how we normally receive these kind of stories.
Purely story-wise, it makes sense that somewhere like Steel Mountain would just have like a portrait of the president up in the fancy executive diners.
Right, exactly.
Hall.
And that in itself also adds the dimension of, the military-industrial complex is inherently tied up with
whoever's got the codes.
All the corporate tech, and all of these things are inextricably connected. So Tyrell is saying, all safe is finished and you know it is, but you won't let it die. And you and I were both perfectionists, so we're once again in that. Tyrell's still peddling that snake oil about the two of them being the same, and Elliot is still not on board with this at all. Now, Tyrell has this harsh spiel about the waiter, who apparently has been serving him here for 7 years, and he muses about how many marriages the guy might have had, how many kids, child support payments, used cars and whatnot. Must be in his 50s. What must he think of himself? As he puts it, the life of an ordinary cockroach whose biggest purpose is to serve me salad. Now, this is Tyrell at his most Patrick Bateman, I think.
Especially given when he says that, the guy then brings over their food and he gives them the most like warm,
the shit-eating grin.
smile, like, dang.
And what I find interesting about that is, given what we've just been through with Elliot skewering Bill the way he did, this is like the flip side of that. Tyrell is being honest in what he's saying about what he thinks about this waiter, but he's been kind enough not to say it to his face. Yeah. Whereas Elliot had to do the polar opposite. And I think it's an interesting flip, and it's really twisting the knife in Elliot, his sense of guilt about this, and I think that's part of what kind of escalates his nausea in this scene. So we get the classic security guard paranoia as these guys come over and get Tyrell to sign the document, and that's where Elliot makes his excuse, and he has to go to the bathroom. James, hit the klaxon. Here comes the theme.
It's time for our YouTube channel to get demonetized again, because it's Matt Quayle's Mr. Robot theme.
You ready? Never gets old.
It's so convincing that every video version of this podcast that I put up with us doing that has been demonetized, so I'm assuming that it's not the actual music, but it's our version of it that's so accurate.
You think that's a shite a cappella, mate? Yeah, well, Universal Music says otherwise. Post-pandemic, first thing I'm going to do is go to a karaoke night. I'm going to walk up and say, "Here, mate, you got the theme tune to Mr. Robot?"
Check out our YouTube channel, youtube.com/F-Sobriety Podcast.
Give us a like, give us a subscribe, give us a review, give us a review on the other things as well while we're at it.
Yep.
Anyway,
we'll come to that at the end. That's what they call in the industry a call to action.
So Elliot does a massive spew in the sink, blows chunks, hurls, whatever you want to call it. It's a really unpleasant looking puke, by the way. I don't like the colour of that one bit.
That is 100% unfiltered special juice.
That's 100% school dinner semolina right there. I was not digging it at all. Anyway, conveniently there's a wee side office where he sees there's access to the climate control system. Yep. So Elliot begins to set up the Raspberry Pi. One Raspberry Pi. He's in the middle of all that, and Tyrell enters. And Elliot says, "I had to watch my face." Which totally reminds me of Patrick Bateman saying, "I have to return some videotapes."
Yeah. Tyrell just mic drops while urinating.
He does, lays it all out. Yeah, I know you framed Terry Colby. I also know about your dad. That's a matter of public record that he worked for the company. So he knows everything. He knows about Elliot's motive for revenge, which Tyrell characterises as being so ordinary, and that's your weakness. Ordinary, just like our waiter. Even extraordinary people are driven by human banalities, and we're all human, except me. And as a long point says, I'm joking. Is he joking? I'm confused as to what constitutes a joke for Tyrell.
Well, me too, because later on at the dinner party, the whole toilet thing is like, what's he doing?
Yeah, what part is the joke and what part is just psychopathy?
I don't get what he's trying to achieve sometimes, and that's one of the things that I enjoy about the character, even though he's the worst.
Same here. Even on the rewatch, there are still so much of his motivations that are really perplexing. I'm like, okay, I feel like you could have done this maybe a subtler and more effective way, but alright, you do you, pal.
Yeah, and he tells Elliot to enjoy his long drive back to New York.
Yeah. I'm getting the helicopter to pick me up. Toodle pip. More like the Wellickopter. A very relieved Elliot finishes his pie. Meanwhile, at Fun Society, Darlene is in a chat with the Dark Army. She's getting very frantic. She gets banned from all the chats. Trenton asks what they're saying, and Darlene confirms that they are saying they're a bunch of dickless assholes. Citation needed. I don't think that's what they say.
What they do say is just, "You misunderstood."
Yeah.
She says, "Misunderstood what?" And then she gets the ban hammer.
Yep. She gets cancelled by the Dark Army. Is that what it's come to? Cancel culture is out of control, James.
She's understandably somewhat fuming.
I do enjoy an exasperated Darlene. Carly Chaikin really knocks these scenes out of the park.
And she says she's going to go and deal with it, and Trenton's like, "Nyeh."
Maybe do a calm down, friend. And Darlene says, "I'm either fixing this or breaking it." Now, this is the first hint we really get here, I think, of just how invested Darlene is in this, to the extent that she is desperate without it. Like, without this mission, she feels hopeless.
Yeah.
And it's so easy to say this about so much of the show now, but I feel like this is another one of those areas where it's such an obvious parallel to both Mr. Robot and Elliot that they are desperately trying to cling on to a sense of a mission in order to give their lives meaning. And it's like they're all in a very similar psychological space. Which, by the way, I'm going to tie it back round to Magda slightly, because I do feel like some of Darlene's own neuroses are so similar to Elliot's, even though they're not as pronounced. But you can see the effects of having grown up in an abusive household, I think, in Darlene's personality, which is one of the reasons why I think, no, Magda must have been an abuser. Because, I mean, don't get me wrong, there's all sorts of reasons why people might display this kind of behaviour. But having, from my own experience, it just rings very true that someone who's grown up in that sort of household, there you need a reason, you need a thing to do, you need to believe in something, and you need to know that it's going to happen, and any obstacle to it frustrates you to the point where you feel like you're going to have a breakdown. And we do see later in the show that Darlene actually suffers from panic attacks. So I do feel like that all knits together. Again, though, I am not a qualified psychologist.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah, so please don't send in your solicitations for psychiatric advice. I am not qualified.
You know who is qualified, though? Is the dude but here playing the role of Angela's dad.
I really like this guy.
Yeah, I was getting big dude vibes.
Yeah, this rug really ties the room together. So Angela turns up. Apparently Ollie has been calling her dad non-stop. And Angela's dad has some choice words to say about Ollie, including Ollie said he can learn to forgive Angela, which I think is my favourite part. And Angela's dad apparently told Ollie she should have broken up with him a long time ago. And when asked what's wrong, Angela claims, normal work and money stuff. Oh, and he cheated on me. Dad's not surprised, he said. The kid's a douchebag.
Whole gang looking. Still can't find the lie.
I like the cut of Angela's dad's jib.
Yep.
So he offers to loan her money, says she can stay as long as she wants, and is very insistent about all these things despite Angela's protestations. French toast coming up. Angela's dad's a good dude. I do feel bad about where this goes later in the show.
Yeah.
Nobody comes out of this show well, do you know that?
Yeah. But if they don't die, they don't have a good ride of it.
Yeah, they just go through hell.
Yep.
Okay, Terrell and Joanna in the back of the car here. They're speaking in their own dialect.
Once again, it's the classical music.
All the Wellickisms.
Yep, Mozart's violin concerto in B flat this time.
And they're discussing how they're going to approach Scott and Sharon Knowles. Joanna asks here, is he the one who talks about wine? And I made a note here, oh no, I am Scott Knowles.
Did you feel personally attacked?
I did buy that content.
I've made a note here that just says Joanna is looking her most inhumanly lovely.
Yeah, that's fair. She's worried about Sharon because she hasn't quite figured out what the angle is on Sharon. She says, I don't know what she wants and it makes me nervous. And there's a bit of a reflection of the situation between Terrell and Elliot in this sort of scenario. Terrell says, with a chuckle, not everyone is as miserable as you.
There's a little bit of sweetness there. There's like a glimpse of maybe they could have like an ordinary relationship. It's the way he just kind of touches her leg and calls her babe and has a wee chuckle. Is like, oh, it's almost sweet if you weren't a pair of fucking sociopaths.
Yeah, as we discussed in the previous episode, there is a genuine tenderness between the two characters. It's just that it's couched in all this utter fucking weirdness and, kind of sociopathic tendencies. But somewhere in there, similar to if Josto and Orietta in Fargo Season 4 had a happier outcome without all the 1950s gangster politics that got in the way, who knows, maybe they could have ended up like this. Darlene visits Cisco at his job in the library. Oh my god, man, that library.
It's beautiful. But also, I love the fact that someone whose second professional life, I guess, is so involved in hacking and being online that he works in just a proper paper analog library. Right,
yes. It's a really nice juxtaposition. I really love this character. I've always liked Cisco. Again, he's one of several characters in the show that I wish we got a wee bit more of. But I really like the work that's gone into building up this character without telling you too much. The fact he works in this place is so cool. Like, I just think he seems like a cool guy. If it wasn't for all the very dangerous international crimes he was involved in, he'd probably be a good guy to hang out with. I feel so bad for Darlene and Cisco in another life. Yep. So Darlene gets very shouty, very frustrated, and there's a lot of darting eyes from people in the library. And she says, get that klaxon ready, James.
Just winding it up here. we're good to go.
You better tell your pal Whiterose to stop being a pussy and start growing a pair. First mention of Whiterose.
Incredible.
And at this point in time, it's delivered as though that name means next to nothing. It's like a throwaway detail. It's like, oh, Whiterose is just the person that Cisco talks to in the Dark Army, was what I was thinking at the time when I first saw this. I was not thinking that Whiterose was going to be an international supervillain.
But on rewatch, Cisco freaks it when she says that
Oh
name.
yeah, he is so terrified. Yeah. And now you understand why. I mean, with the context of where the show goes, yeah, you would be terrified. Yeah, and he completely sells it. And I guess that's why, one of the things, when I was first watching this show, when I first watched these episodes, I think I was just so overcome with how tonally weird this show was. And so when Cisco is so terrified by that, I think part of my brain was not so much thinking, well, that must be a really dangerous individual. I was just more thinking that, well, everybody in this show is so utterly paranoid that this could mean anything.
Yeah.
Whereas now it's like, oh no, Cisco had every reason to be this terrified. So he tells her it's over, it's not happening. And I love Darlene's line here. She says, I can't go back to my people with that. And it's kind of a precursor to the Darlene we see in season 2, where she becomes very much the active revolutionary role in Elliot's absence.
Yep. She is one of like the leaders of the movement.
Yeah, there's that part of her that needs to be that, needs to be that person at the front. And I think it's as much because there's parts of herself she wants to bury, which I think is quite common for a lot of people in those situations. But it's a nice detail. It's just a nice choice of words. As she needles away, I love this, where he says, okay, just between us, to which she replies, I'm not about to tweet about it, unlike Fernando Vera. Cisco tells her the Dark Army were out of this before they even got to Steel Mountain, and they did not say why, and you need to let it go. So Darlene, completely desperate, completely lost now without this. She screams, scatters books everywhere, and I think here is where we're saying, in terms of the episode's theme, motif, this is Darlene's exploit. This is her vulnerability. She needs this mission to work, because without it, she's got a pit in her that she's not dealt with. And so this is where she's being exploited.
Also, this episode just follows the exploits of all the different characters.
That is also
meaning.
true. Yep. I see what you're doing, Sam. Also, I did make a note here that it's very similar to the way Mr. Robot reacts at the end of this episode, where he starts trashing stuff.
Yeah.
So once again, it's drawn the familial connection between these characters. And of course, there's the whole issue of Elliot's anger issues, which have yet to be addressed, which Krista mentioned way back in episode 1. And I felt like such an idiot after the reveal in season 4, because I should have been thinking to myself, we don't ever really see Elliot be all that angry, to be honest. We'd see him be pretty intense, yes. We see him be paranoid, desperate, anxious, all these things. You don't actually see him really demonstrate a lot of anger, certainly not physically. And so we should have been asking questions about why he was there for anger issues, because it's not the first thing that comes to mind when you describe Elliot's behaviour. Okay, so the continuing adventures of American Psychos. Tyrell and Joanna dining with the Knowleses.
Joanna is just being the perfect dinner guest.
She really is, yeah. She's got this down to a fine art. This is some peak psyops, not for gammons. So Sharon is saying, I don't even have time to read your secret emails. Ha ha ha. This is such a weird conversation. It's a very Esmail-esque detail here, though, where she says she worked at Microsoft for a year and it felt like a decade. Really enjoy Tyrell's kind of silent signal to Joanna to engage Sharon in small talk.
Yeah.
So that he can engage Scott in the important stuff. So he asks Scott about, CTO position, huh? And Scott immediately, no dummy, is like, oh, okay, I see. Comes out and says that he's very suspicious. He says 4 people knew about this conversation. Somehow you're number 5. And Tyrell just persists, I'm exactly what you need in a right hand. It's like, so that's what this is about. And Tyrell's line, isn't everything about something? I love that, because it's such simultaneously a meaningless statement and yet also carries so much weight in this scene.
Yeah.
As far as performance-wise, is it Michelle Hicks who plays Sharon? Mm-hmm. Her performance here is really subtle. I like the way you see that she's picked up that something is going down here, and she's like trying to get away from Joanna's conversation without being rude about it. And Scott says, if you were me, would you trust you, to Tyrell? To which he says, I wouldn't even have let me in the house. as if to say, I am always way ahead of you.
Oh, he's so smug.
Tyrell is most punchable. So in the minivan, the fellas from F Society are on their way back.
Yep, some people don't have helicopters. They have to do the long drive while Tyrell's having dinner. They're just chugging along.
Elliot gets a call from Shayla. Apparently she's awesome at cocktails. Part of her job is very much like packing mollies, so she's an expert.
Yeah, she's got transferable skills from her previous occupation. She's doing great.
Elliot says he's good. I did what I had to do today. And she invites him over. And that's going to be nice, I think, at the end of the episode, isn't it? That's going to be nice for me to catch up. Be a nice wee ending to this episode.
I'm sure she won't try and phone him about anything else between now and the end of the episode.
I think everything's going to be just dandy-o.
Yep.
And they'll both be able to relax together. Elliot will work through some of his anxiety. Yeah, it'll be good. After dinner, Joanna, now in her full exploit mode, knowing Scott's weakness,
How are we sniffing my wine here?
guides him right into chatting about the thing he cannot stop chatting about, wine, and a swing music in the background. Everything about this is full upper middle class, yuppie bullshit party to the max.
Yeah.
So while Scott is waxing fucking ad nauseum about
Dried red fruits.
violet and lemon peel and fucking used boots and paper clips and whatever else you might smell in that glass of wine, Tyrell is making his move on Sharon with the line, the immortal line, how do you not blow your brains out being married to him? To which Sharon says, excuse me, and he says, shall I repeat the question?
She says, you're a guest in my house. And he says, yes.
Yeah, a very honest one. It's a great exchange. She chooses to take that as a bad taste joke and excuses herself to the bathroom. Joanna has Scott fully snared. He's off to find all signs of vintage exotic balls.
His prized possession.
To bore Joanna to death.
I love, this is the thing I noticed the second time, not the first time. Earlier on, she's talking about how she can't drink wine because she's pregnant and she's drinking water. When Sharon Knowles gets up to go to the bathroom and then Scott Knowles' back's turned and Tyrell gets up to go out, he puts his glass of wine down and Joanna grabs it and downs it.
Yes, yeah.
It's so funny.
Yeah, it's great. It's classic Joanna. There's a part of me, by the way, that anytime I see wine enthusiasts in any TV drama or fictionalized TV show of any kind, it always reminds me of that episode of Black Books where Bernard and Manny, for some reason, they're in some other guy's house and he's got a big wine collection and he start tanning into the wine and there's like wine that's like over 100 years old and they're just getting absolutely steaming. And there's a part where it's like, it'd be cool if Bernard Black just walked into this right now. But then again, I remember the creator of Black Books is a mad turf.
I hear you're a turf now, father.
Farther turf, more like.
Down with this sort
as
of
in
thing.
Get them farther away. Like the cows in the field.
Careful now.
These turfs are far away. Anyway, Sharon on the toilet. Now, I have beef here. Why is it that people on TV and movies are incapable of locking the bathroom door? What is this? Or do people in the States not lock the bathroom door?
Maybe it's because it's her house.
Yeah, but I lock the door in my own house. Do you not lock the door in your own house when you go to the bathroom?
Actually, well, I mean, not when I'm on my own, but...
I keep all doors locked at all times. I'm perfectly normal. I'm having a normal one. I'm also wearing Kleenex boxes as shoes.
Did you see Psycho at formative age? Like, every time you're in the bathroom, you're like, nope.
But seriously though, I would never go to the bathroom with somebody else in the house and not lock the door. That seems weird.
I'd go to the bathroom with the door open. I wouldn't care. But you're in my house, my rules.
My house, my rules, the sound of my pish. Enjoy. I think you'll be pleased.
Tinkle time.
Alright,
maybe it doesn't have a lock. Because she's like, oh, there's someone in here.
Oh, they spent so much money on wine, they could not afford a lock for
I
the
mean,
bathroom door.
Scott Knowles is responsible for the decor.
Well, in fairness, he drinks so much wine, he probably needs to burst in there very urgently. Yeah. Okay, we've solved it. It's perfect. It's fine. More like Scott Lols.
Scott Knowles best.
So at any rate, Tyrell barges in there.
What's he doing though? What is
stands there in a very relaxed posture with his hands in his pockets, and the way the shot is framed with the very suggestive framing of Sharon's head at waist height on Tyrell, yeah, it's just pure sexual power energy. Everything about this scene is so disturbing. That pause seems to last an eternity before he finally says, "Thank you for a lovely evening." It's like, what are you fucking doing, you madman? Now, I have to say, we said earlier, some of Tyrell's motivations are still a bit obscure in retrospect. I'm going full out and saying this is one of them. I don't know if this is meant to be a seduction technique or just a power play or some combination of both. The former seems weird to me. Now, call me crazy. I don't find this particularly sexy.
But here's the thing. I think he's so fucked in the head, and he is, that he thinks that he's seducing her with this. Because that's what he does. We've seen it before already in the series. And I think he goes in there expecting her to just unbuckle his pants or whatever. And and that doesn't happen. And he's like, okay, bye. Thanks for a lovely evening.
Yeah, I mean, her posture as well is really hard to decipher. Like, when she leans back, is that a submissive gesture? Or is it just... There's a part of my brain that's like going somewhere that's much more disturbing, where she sort of feels like, oh, he is going to attack me, and she's sort of bracing herself. Given where the relationship goes, I do think maybe there's more stake in the former rather than the latter. So maybe she is just as fucking weird as him, right? Maybe it's just as simple as that.
But she does grass him up, though, so, you know.
She does, that's true. Yeah. Yeah, okay. I mean, I think I watched this the first time pretending to myself I understood it. And now every time I go back on it and I go, nope, I cannot 100% get a handle on this.
I love the idea that that's what the Wellocks do when they come round to your house for dinner, though. Like, regardless of situation, at some point, you'll...
It's a Scandinavian after-dinner tradition. Scandinavian listeners, please write in and let us know more about your archaic Scandinavian after-dinner traditions. We don't judge.
Harks back to the days of the Viking. So, meanwhile, back at Fun Society...
The boys are back in town.
Hail the conquering heroes.
Darlene is ready to kill their buzz. God damn it, Darlene. So she tells them the Dark Army is bailed. They've gone dark. Weren't they already dark? Anyway. So Mr. Robot, in a very composed manner, and totally having a normal one, starts smashing some equipment. Very evocative, once again, of what we learn is Elliot's anger issues.
Yep,
which, again, this should have been the tell.
Well, we see Elliot just passively watching from the corner of the room.
Yeah, he's completely inactive at this point. Darlene is taking this hard on herself. She feels she fucked up. Elliot ignores a call from Shayla.
Should have taken that call, dude.
Yep. Egg on your face. Raspberry pie on your face. Darlene insists on executing the plan anyway. She says, we dictate the terms. So we see she is still really desperate for control here. So Mr. Robot throws even more shit, smashes a keyboard. He explains to her, it will have no effect. We don't want to hurt them, we want to kill them. Them meaning Evil Core. Darlene says, well, neither will happen if we do nothing. Take another step and I'll do it. I do love that standoff moment.
It's like she's holding a gun. There's a real hostage situation, can I feel to it? But she's just getting ready to hit enter.
Mr. Robot says they will recover better, and the revolution we've dreamed about will be dead and buried because of you.
Again, the way he says, the revolution we've always talked about.
Mm-hmm.
Another tell that there's a deeper relationship between characters here that we will soon learn, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, that does give us the tell that Mr. Robot and Darlene at least have known each other quite some time. Mm-hmm. He storms out. He storms to the other side of the room, says, is there anyone here who can communicate with this woman? And so X and Mr. Robot enter Elliot, who suddenly becomes active and sidles up to Darlene. And she is looking to him for permission. Please tell me to execute. And again, how did we not see this?
Yeah.
So Elliot's closeness to her just seems to bring her back down to earth. The fact he's standing there passively seems to pacify her. And Carly Shaken's delivery of, but we're so close. I don't know about you, but I really feel the desperation in that line.
That is heartbreaking.
It is. And Elliot says, we've got this far, we'll find a way, just not tonight. And in the moment he says that, I know that Mr. Robot, his version of being passive, is back to munching popcorn.
Yep. Take a drink for another popcorn reference.
So that situation diffused.
I would love to see a version of that scene where either Christian Slater does the whole thing or Rami Malek does the whole thing. Because that change in character when it's still the same person is just so well done when you think of it being that way. Of them just walking away and coming back. Or in fact, not even walking away, just still staying in the same place and then switching.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, it's so good. Why did we not see this?
And you think how quickly the turnaround is as well. how weird that would have looked to Mobley and Romero in Trenton. Where 1 minute he's saying, "Can anyone talk some sense into this woman?" And then like seconds later going, "Hey, it's fine. We'll regroup. It'll all be good. We'll think of something." And it sort of really contextualizes the way that Romero reacts when you see him going off with a big sigh. This fucking guy.
Yep. We get Love on a Real Train by Tangerine Dream.
Right, yeah, good needle drop. Elliot invites Darlene to crash at his place, clearly feeling guilty. And with the context of everything we know now, this is exactly what Darlene needs. And I really feel good for Darlene at this moment, because as much as she's really distressed here, the fact she's at least got Elliot back and welcoming her back is, who knows what she would have done without that. And it seemed like there was a hair trigger there, but it could have gone either way. Yeah. So Darlene is pretty sure this is all her fault. So they're off on the subway. So we take a drink once again for characters on a train, although not looking particularly paranoid this time.
What's with these characters on a train looking paranoid?
What's the deal with... So Elliot starts relating to us this memory he has of playing hooky with his dad at the beach. That means bunking off school when you're comfy where we comfy. It was too cold to go in the water, so they sat on the beach and they ate pizza. When Elliot got home, he tells us that his shoes were full of sand and he dumped the sand all over his bedroom floor. He was 6 years old at the time. He tells us that his mother screamed at him, but his dad wasn't angry. And his dad explained it had taken billions of years for that sand to get exactly where it was, and that now Elliot had effectively changed the world by moving it. And Elliot tells us it's a nice thought, but he later realised that he would need way more time than he could ever have to move as much sand or move the beach in a way that would ever be meaningful. As he's telling us this, we're getting the footage of Angela finding her dad's overdue bills. And that's intercut with Elliot and Darlene in the subway, with Darlene with her head on Elliot's shoulder. I love that shot. I think it's such a beautiful shot. Given everything you know about the show, I feel like that one shot encapsulates so much of my feelings about these characters that I did feel I was getting a bit misty-eyed at that shot when I was watching it this time around.
A bit Misty Roberts.
So Elliot continues, every day we change the world, but to do so in a way that means anything, it takes more time than most people have. It's slow, it's methodical, it's exhausting. Now, I love that line because it's 100% the truth about any kind of social change or any kind of social movement. And it kind of draws a line under the idea that what F Society are doing here cannot be the be-all and end-all, and perhaps it lays the seed in your mind that perhaps the mistake they're making here is they're not thinking far enough ahead. And that's something that Elliot has to deal with come season 3.
And he says we don't all have the stomach for it, and you assume he's referring to certain members of F Society, but he could well be talking about himself at this point as well.
Yeah. Angela watches her dad for a little while by the lamplight. Looks like she's going to confront him about the bills, but she decides against it.
Just one of those bills is for $25,654.
Yeah, we're not talking small change here.
Yeah. And they're all from Ecor Insurance. Just in case you were unaware of who the bad guys are.
Yeah, this show's quite subtle that way. So in a sense, Elliot, I guess, it can also be applied to Angela's impending journey. Because as we will see in a second, as the show presents this visual metaphor to us, Angela is about to take a very particular route, and it's not going to be an easy journey for her either. And there is the same sense now on the rewatch. Maybe she did not think through enough of this either.
I love the metaphorical and literal crossroads.
It's such a simple metaphor, but it really, really works in this context. So Elliot and Darlene arrive at Elliot's apartment. Flipper is doing her a bark. Elliot explains that Shayla has the dog.
Flipper doesn't shit on Shayla's pillowcases.
Elliot's apartment is busted open. There's a ringing phone on the floor. He answers, and of course, it's Fernando Vera on the other end. Hey, bruh.
Hey, bruh. Hey, bruh.
Sometimes the universe aligns perfectly, bruh. Here I am, locked away. Still it brings you right to me, bruh. Bruh.
Bruh.
So yeah, we segue to Angela running in the night. And I like by this point, Elliot's voiceover has ended, so we spend this moment with Angela. And yeah, the fork in the road ahead of her. Credits begin. And yeah, everything, the music, the way that's, even the lighting and even the sweats that Angela is wearing, everything's got a very 1980s vibe about it. And I do feel like that's deliberately evocative, because the 80s being sort of the era of, the American Psycho era, as we've evoked on this episode several times. And sort of this show kind of taking on all the monsters that era spawned. It's just it's a very nice aesthetic touch.
Wall Street, capitalism, Tangerine Dream.
All the touchstones. Yeah, so we don't see what route Angela takes, and then it's credits, and it's a beautiful way to end the episode. It's another winner. So on that note, let's get to the business of 5s out of 9. Where do you land?
This episode is about an 8 5s out of 9 for me, I think, or an 8.5 5s out of 9. It's a near perfect episode of TV.
I feel we say that a lot about this show.
It's tough not
but
to...
But it's almost like
honestly,
it's our favourite show or something.
Yeah, it's tough to not just do a 9 every time. So I'm trying to find ways to vary my score. But the writing in this is so acerbic and hilarious in a way that the show isn't very often. Like, there's always, like, there's a lot of times there's, like, a little humour running through and among the drama, but this particular episode is just full of zingers. It's really beautifully directed. It progresses the story really well. The performances are off the chain. Yeah, 8.5.
Yeah, fair enough. I can live with that. I am going to score this episode also 8.5 5s out of 9. For all the reasons you just mentioned. I got to say, this, I know I've touched on this already, but see, doing this particular rewatch where we're doing it 1 or 2 episodes at a time, it's really getting a sense of just how complete these episodes are as episodes, rather than just part of an ongoing story. And it really is an art in itself to construct an hour of television that's very true to a set of themes and a set of motifs that also progresses the story, progresses the characters, does all the things that an ongoing story needs to do simultaneously. It really is masterful stuff. And this show hits so many of those bases without any of it seeming particularly contrived. Yeah, as you say, it's another near perfect episode. Weirdly enough, prior to this, I don't think, in my own thoughts when I'm thinking about the show, that this episode ranks or has ranked in the past very much in what I would say are my favourite episodes. I tend to kind of forget this one. Like, I remember moments of it. Moments of it are very vivid, but when I kind of forget. It's in that part in the middle of season 1 where I forget which episodes are which.
Yeah, you kind of just go, oh yeah, that moment with Belle.
Right, yeah, exactly. Whereas now, because we're doing this episode by episode and I'm really get clued into what the motifs are each episode, I'm like, oh no, this is going to stick in my head a bit more. Because I've never not binged this show before doing this for the purposes of the podcast. So yeah, it's making these things way more solid in my mind. So yeah, as an episode of television, it's breathtakingly good. I remember the first time I watched this, really having... Well, I think I did have some ideas of where this would go, and all of them turned out to be wrong.
Yeah, right now, this could still be hack of the week.
Yeah, they're still pushing that. I mean, they've still got that angle. Because you do seem... There's almost an element of Mr. Robot, the character, is sort of a malign influence who is distracting Elliot from his mission. And the way they're fleshing out Darlene, I remember thinking to myself, maybe... I don't know if I thought about it consciously, but it was definitely in there somewhere that maybe Darlene would turn out to be an ally of Elliot and turn against Mr. Robot. That's kind of what I was thinking, but of course all of this was before I had any appreciation whatsoever that Mr. Robot and Elliot are the same person. So yeah, none of my predictions or any sort of forethought I had about where the story would go at this point turned out to be remotely accurate.
Yep. Samesies. I'm looking forward to, in that sense, doing season 2 episode by episode and really focusing on it, because I've watched season 2 a couple of times since it was first on, and both those times I binged it. And when it was on, the first time I watched it week to week, but I just watched it for sheer entertainment. I didn't really focus on it, and I'm really looking forward to focusing on season 2.
Yeah.
And just like really getting into each episode as an individual piece.
The much maligned season 2, which I love season 2, and I love all 4 of the seasons of this show equally. I don't actually have a favourite one. I think they're all great. But I sometimes want to say that season 2 is my favourite just because it gets so much shit. I don't understand why.
On Twitter, like Esmail Core always retweets anything that anyone says about Mr. Robot. And they're almost always, oh, I finally got past season 2 of Mr. Robot and I can't believe I slept on this show, it's amazing. And Like, why would you sleep on this show?
I know, I
through
don't get it. Like, it's in some ways less propulsive than the other seasons. Like, you're obviously Elliot, for what turned out to be obvious reasons, he's kind of stagnated a bit, whereas season 3 he's very much on a mission again, and it really picks up. But it's not like nothing happens in season 2. Stuff is happening to Elliot all the time. And I said before that one of the reasons I love this show, and all of the quality shows of this era, a lot of them have this in common, where it's what I call novelistic. It really reflects the structure of a good novel rather than what used to be the standard structure of a television show. And that a long novel will often be split up into 3, 4, 5 parts. And to me, Mr. Robot did that thing where season 2 was very much like a part of a novel. It was not a season of TV in the sense that it was trying to hit all the things that a TV show was meant to do every season. It was doing one very specific thing because that was the part of the story it was exploring. The same way that season 3 does a very specific thing. It just so happens that I think for a lot of people, season 3 was more similar to the energy of season 1, and that sort of got people more on the wagon. For me, I love all 4 seasons. They all do very different things. They're all exploring different parts of the story. Elliot is in a very different place each season, and I think the way the show treats the state of his mind and where exactly he is, both physically and mentally, is entirely appropriately reflected on how the story is told. And I think season 2 is every bit as flawless in that respect as the other 3 seasons.
Hard agree.
And if you disagree, fuck you.
9 5s out of 9 for that opinion.
If you like that one, I have others that are very similar.
So, Craig, what's next?
I think we're going to keep striking while the iron's hot here, because let's take stock of where we are here, because I think for the year ahead, as much as we can plan it, we've got, as far as TV shows we want to cover that are forthcoming, we might as well just spread our cards on the table here. Doom Patrol is going to be back at some point. It's probably not going to be until late in the year, though. Likewise, Atlanta is going to be coming back, and that's a show I think we should cover for when it comes back. And Euphoria is hopefully also going to be come back late this year, and you haven't watched season 1 yet. So what I think we will do with both the latter I've mentioned of those 3 shows, we'll do a recap podcast for the previous seasons and then dive in, and that you'll have time to watch Euphoria. You've only got 10 episodes to watch. So we can do a recap episode, and then when it starts airing, we can do it as often as we can, as close to weekly as we can manage. And I think in between, given that it's a pretty sparse lineup we've got there, that gives us hopefully more time and space to kind of experiment with the format of the podcast and explore more of the things we want to explore. I mentioned earlier this episode we are overdue a musical episode, so I think if you're agreeable with this, that next episode we should continue with the Mr. Robot, and then maybe after that do a music themed episode, unless something else comes up. But I think that's the way we should play it just now.
Sounds spiffy to me. I'm overdue a long rant about Fiona Apple.
Well, there you go.
Stay tuned, listeners, if you're into that sort of thing.
I've got a list of artists I want to do the deep dive with in the way that I did the Jesse Reyes podcast. So I need to decide on which one I'm going to do.
If there are any artists who have a vaguely fruit-related name, that would be helpful.
All right, yeah, for the purpose of the title, yeah. The title always comes first on this podcast, and that's really what makes it magical.
I'm sure we'll come up with a suitable title for it. In the meantime, join us on episode 12 of F Sobriety, where we'll be catching up again on a little bit more WandaVision probably, and doing a deep dive on 1 or 2, depending on how we're feeling.
Yeah, we'll see how we are. Here's the thing, right? And I don't know if we mentioned this, but we have a habit lately of recording podcasts on the night before the world suddenly goes crazy again and mad shit starts to happen. And so it gives us so much stuff to catch up on, and so we end up not having quite as much time on the podcast to talk about the things we'd originally planned to talk about. So there's a lot of content we tend to want to cover week to week. So we'll see what happens. But the plan is 1 or 2 episodes of Mr. Robot will be covered in the next episode.
In the meantime, thank you for listening. If you listen to us on Apple Podcasts, we would greatly appreciate it if you're able to give us a good review on there, or a review of any type, a rating, review.
Please, yes, because that's the thing that helps podcasts the most. So if you enjoy what we do, first of all, God help you, And second of all, please do give us a positive review and share and tell your friends and all that stuff. We really do appreciate it. The fact that there's actually people out there who download our episodes on the day that they're uploaded is crazy to me. And I love it.
It is wild, and thank you for that. If you do that, it's brilliant. If you know people who prefer to listen to podcasts on YouTube, then by all means check out our new YouTube channel. The Hamiltron will have the details at the end of the episode. But yeah, wherever you find us, we'll be there, and we really appreciate everyone listening. Thanks for coming on these weird TV and music exploration journeys
miscellaneous
with us.
cultural journeys. Yeah, no, we love doing this, and we love the fact that people listen. So yeah, thank you ever so much, and we will continue to try and entertain you if that's what we do. Whatever it is we're doing right, we'll try and keep doing it.
And if there's anything that we're not doing right, we'll try and do less of it. Oh, Craig, just looking at my bottle of Casillero del Diablo here.
I don't know about you, James, but I am pretty much approaching what they call in the business half the bottle. That's last orders. Do your talking while you're walking.
Thanks for listening.
Toodle pip.
F Sobriety, Episode 11, Guided by Lesser Evil, was conceived by Craig Woods and James Hamilton, edited by James Hamilton, and is a production of Half the Bottle. The theme music is Colossal Estates by Errors, available on Rock Action Records. Want to know what our exploits are? Find out by visiting our Facebook page on facebook.com/fsobrietypodcast, on Instagram for some reason at fsobrietypodcast, on Twitter at fsobrietycast, and all our episodes are available on YouTube at youtube.com/fsobrietypodcast. Brah.
Elliot does a massive spew in the sink, blows chunks. And he's wondering, is this withdrawals or is it because of Terrell? Am I his malware?
I've not heard blows chunks since Wayne's World. I need to start that again.